Hello, hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers Sunday Sermon. This is 4S. I'm David Johnson, and Mac Attack. Let's get started. Mac, how you doing? We missed you last week.
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Actually, last week I I got I lived pretty much in an airport terminal. Uh, if you're taking flights in America, don't take United Airlines ever. Uh, just a lot of incompetence and lots of connecting flights and delays and all that. But it all worked out in the end. But yeah, it just messed up with my timing overall. But yeah, I'm fine. Can't complain. Everything's good.
Yeah, I mean, some of the worst flights I've ever had were on United and American and Delta. Honestly, you just don't fly because
Yeah,
the
just don't
airline
like
industry
just
is
take a
terrible.
train. Yeah, it's and they so I was delayed for about 6 hours. And they sent me like a $15. Hey, we're really sorry you got delayed. Here's
Well,
$15. So I go and use the $15 and they say no, you can't. So you know how you have to um like if you purchase something with a voucher, it has to be the whole amount.
mhm.
It can't be like, okay, I'll buy something from here, then I'll go to the other store. I had to buy like something. Like I had to make sure it was the full amount. So I
Right.
only spent about like $6 on it and then it disappeared. It couldn't work again.
Yeah, well, that's the whole scam of gift cards, that whole
Yeah,
mechanic. So,
yeah. First world
don't even
problem.
don't even get me started. Capitalism, yuck. Anyway, it's 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 the worst except for every other system out there. Um, so let's do a video. I'm looking at an image of Dan. Is it Baker? Is it Dan, is that his name?
Barker, Dan
Barker.
Parker,
Okay,
Barker. Yeah,
Dan
like dog
Barker.
bark, bark. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so a quick disclaimer. I've read Dan. He's been around for a while. If there's someone who doesn't know who Dan is, I would describe him maybe too grandiosely as the father of modern deconstructionism. Um, because he was the foundation for Freedom from Religion Foundation and all that. He was very instrumental in that stuff. His book was one of the first that I read from a major personage who deconstructed, and it just kind of, I think, for the modern movement of what we think of as deconstruction, his name has to be mentioned as one of those who was instrumental in that. Like I said, I mean, having said that, I also don't find Dan Barker to be very relevant today. Um, this is not an insult. It's not intended to be an insult. It probably will come off that way. But a lot of a lot of the old arguments don't, when played out of context, don't recognize that newer arguments have been made, newer rebuttals to those old arguments have been made. It's not to say that the old arguments are invalid, because I don't think they are, but it's a little bit like teaching Newton without Einstein. Newton's not wrong, he's incomplete. And Barker is not wrong, he's incomplete, and he was dealing with um, a very incomplete apologetic, I think, at that time. Now, I don't know how old this particular video is. It may not be all that old at all, but Barker is old, and his arguments have not progressed. And I would say the same thing about Linux as well. Linux is a fossil, and he came up around a time when people were arguing a certain way, and I don't think that he has kept up with modern rebuttals. And I also don't think that most of his arguments were valid even at the time. But that said, I think that we're going to be watching a video of uh, two fossils who would not fare well against most commenters on discussion boards today, let alone people who are at the top of the field.
Yep.
Okay. I was kind of expecting more pushback than that, but
Yep.
all right. Let's just hit. Let's tell the audience about this ridiculous stunt that we're doing today. 3. There's a rule of 3 that we're going to attempt today. Each one of us has 3 stoppages of the video and no more. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't speak when the other person stops. That's a freebie, you know. In football, when one side calls timeout, the other side doesn't keep playing. So it's a break for everybody. But we can't call a specific stoppage more than 3 times. I did not take note of any markers or timestamps to do it. And so we both know that my 3 stoppages are going to come very, very early because I have no self-control. This is not going to go well for me. That said, just giving it a try. This may be a 1-week experiment. Let's go. Whoops. Let's try that again.
I used to believe in God, like our very articulate and eloquent speaker before us. I used to believe firmly in God. I was an ordained minister. I preached the gospel for 19 years. I felt this presence in my mind as I prayed. I got goosebumps as I was in communion with what I thought was the Holy Spirit of God. As I read the Holy Bible and read about the resurrection of Jesus, I dedicated my life to preaching that gospel that I thought was so real, that gave so much meaning, so much hope, so much beauty to the world. But I've changed my mind. I now know I was deluded. I was having a very real, very powerful, but mental experience that happens in most religions. I won't tell you my whole story, but I went through a process of deconversion that took 4 or 5 years, starting as a firm believer, evangelical, street preacher. In the foreword to my book, Godless, that tells that story, Richard Dawkins writes, Dan Barker was not just a preacher, he's the kind of preacher you would not want to sit next to on a bus. That was me. I was so convinced. I was so in love with Jesus, my Savior and my Lord. But I went through a process, evangelical, fundamentalist, where I migrated into more of a moderate, where I preached less hell and more love, into more of a more liberal stage in my life, until eventually I dumped out all the bathwater and I found out there's no baby there. It's just words, it's just arguments. But from the very articulate words we heard tonight, we didn't see any dots connected. We heard a lot of argument, but when it comes to evidence, only 2 pieces were offered, which we will probably get to, personal experience and the resurrection of Jesus. If nothing comes from nothing, then God cannot exist, because God is not nothing. If that premise is true, that nothing comes from nothing, and if God is something, then you've just shot yourself in the foot. Today is Thursday. What does that mean, Mr. President? Thursday. What does it mean? It's the day that millions of people believed in the god Thor. There was a gap in understanding. There was a mystery. What is that noise in the sky? What are those lights? What is all this? What is that? It must be an agency. It must be some being or something, and they named it Thor. And today we have a day of the week. We don't have a Jesus day, but we do have a Thor's day that millions of people believed in, and maybe some still do. But that deity has found itself on the scrap heap of history, just like when I look at the deity I used to believe in, the God of the Bible. It started for me with the simple idea that Jesus told a parable about the prodigal son. A parable is what? It's a fiction. It doesn't matter if the prodigal son actually existed in history. It was the moral tale that mattered. The ancient Israelites made up a parable or a metaphor about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and a talking snake. Look up in the dictionary the word fable. You will find it as a moral tale involving talking animals. We know that Adam and Eve could not have existed because of evolution. I assume everyone in this room accepts the solid fact of the evolution of the human species. So Adam and Eve could not have been real people. It was a metaphor, and many Christians accept that fact. They know there's metaphor figures of speech in the Bible. But in my process, if the prodigal son is a fabrication, if Adam and Eve are a metaphor, then what about this other character, this Yahweh, this Jehovah, this Elohim character? Where do you draw the line? When we know that humans are very good at inventing myths, like the turtle in my Native American ancestry, the turtle that swam across the waters, brought up the mud from the bottom, created the continents. A beautiful story, a wonderful metaphor, but that didn't really happen. The God character himself is also one of those fictions I came to realize. Maybe a useful fiction, maybe it gave meaning, maybe it gave hope, maybe it gave purpose, a fiction nonetheless.
Let's take a moment to address some of the points raised by Dan Baker. He made some bold claims about the authenticity of the Bible and the existence of Adam and Eve. Now, I understand that these ideas might challenge our faith, but let's dive in and explore some counter-arguments. First off, Dan suggests that the Bible is nothing more than a collection of fables. But hold on a second. Let's consider the historical and archaeological evidence that supports the events and figures mentioned in the Bible. We have records tracing the lineage from Adam and Eve to their descendants and even prominent historical figures. These findings have been backed by archaeological discoveries. So, can we really dismiss all of that as mere fables? And speaking of Adam and Eve, Dan questions their existence due to the theory of evolution. Now, it's important to note that the theory of evolution is not without its own debates and discussions within the scientific community. In fact, there have been conferences held by esteemed organizations like the Royal Society, where evolutionary biologists have expressed dissatisfaction with the standard neo-Darwinian theory. They are calling for a new theory that better explains the creative power behind major changes in the history of life. Now, let's circle back to the premise of nothing can come from nothing. The whole idea is if God exists, then there was a time he didn't exist. It was all nothing. Nope. God was all there was before anything. Everything came to being because of him, not the other way round. He is not a product of creation. Creation is the product of him.
The reason I am a non-believer today is because of the lack of evidence and argument for a deity. If there were any real evidence for a God, then by now someone should have won the Nobel Prize for pointing that out. Any scientist in the world would jump at the chance to say, here we go. I mean, if there is a hitherto unknown force of the cosmos that we haven't yet been able to determine, what scientist in the world would not love to make that point? That hasn't been done yet. All we have are what we would call, and I think many believers call, God of the gap. The thunder and lightning was a gap that is now closed. The perhaps fine-tuning of the initial constants, perhaps the origin of the Big Bang. We do have some gaps in science. In fact, it is those gaps that drive science. Without those gaps, we wouldn't have scientific inquiry. What we are offered with is faith and belief. And you were very eloquent in saying that you have a belief in a God, that what you believe is a God. But belief is not knowledge. Belief is simply an assertion, according to the Bible, that you believers believe. Belief is the evidence of things not seen, the substance of things hoped for. Belief is not evidence. Anytime you have to accept an assertion by faith, you're admitting that that assertion cannot be accepted on its own merits. It doesn't have the strength to be accepted as any other, perhaps, scientific hypothesis would be taken. Do scientists gather together every Sunday morning in their scientific sanctuaries and bow their heads and sing, "Yes, the Higgs boson is real. I know in my heart the Higgs boson is real. I will have faith. I will be strong to this secular world who challenges my belief that the God particle is real. Amen." If they did such a thing, you would think they were pretty insecure on the concept, wouldn't you? That's what we find with faith, a constant puffing yourself up. Be strong, resist the world, believe in these absurdities in spite of the doubts. The resurrection of Jesus Christ, the story of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, is the absolute worst example anyone could possibly give for the reliability of the Bible. And I'm not exaggerating. Let me tell you why I'm not exaggerating. Many stories in the Bible are given once or twice. The resurrection story is given 5 times. You can compare them. Scholars have never been able to reconcile those contradictory accounts of the resurrection of Jesus. And besides that, and there are many of them, was the tomb open or closed when the women arrived? What message did the angels give? How many angels were at the tomb? And so on. Besides that, we see through the development in the first century of the Christian myth that the earliest stories were simple. There were no angels. There were very few remarkable events. But as you go 10, 20, 30 years later, you find more and more until you get to the book of John, where you find these outlandish stories. What you see in the development of the resurrection story in the New Testament is the development of a legend, starting simple, growing over time, getting more and more fantastic. It's a mistake to treat those accounts as if they were flat, as if they all happened at one time. We can see before our eyes the development from a simple, unvarnished, perhaps some element of truth in some story about someone who may have spiritually ascended, like we say grandma died and went to heaven. Maybe the early apostles said Jesus died and went to heaven, but that exaggerated. So the resurrection of Jesus Christ is not evidence for a God. And even then, it would just be evidence that a man rose from the dead. How do you connect the dots? We suffer also from a coherent definition of a God. We have a proposition, this house believes in God. What is that word? What does that word God mean? There are many, I don't have time to go into much detail, but there are many incompatible properties that many theists assign to this deity, much like saying this deity is a married bachelor. Can a married bachelor exist? Logically, it cannot. And there are mutually incompatible characteristics of this deity that many theists have put forward that make it a married bachelor. For example, God is supposedly an omniscient being who has free will.
Oh.
But if you know the future, you can't have.
Did you want to do a stoppage here?
No, I was remarking how it was kind of lagging. A lot's been said already.
Right.
He does say a lot of things that are not true or exaggerated. So, like one example that
Hang
I
on.
caught
Do
right
you
now.
want to make this one of your stoppages? And we can do it because I'm saving mine for Linux, and so it would make sense for you to spend some of yours here.
Yeah, he says because there's no evidence. I haven't seen any evidence. But then towards the middle there, he says the reason I don't believe in God is because I have no evidence and there are no good arguments. So is it that you can be convinced by arguments, or is it just evidence only? Because it's always confusing listening to, and lots of atheists kind of like go between these two extremes, like saying, okay, it's because I don't have any evidence. Don't give me arguments. I want evidence. And then they switch it up and say, okay, well, even if you give an argument, that's an argument can never be evidence. So it's not like someone is looking to be convinced by an argument. But then he said he wants an argument that's convincing. So it's like, I'd say he needs to figure out what he wants and what he's looking for. Like, just figure that out, because he's contradicting himself in his very
I don't
long
think that's a
speech.
contradiction.
I think it is, because you can't say I'm looking for evidence only and then say, oh, I haven't heard a good argument. Because
Well,
is an
I
argument
think
evidence?
Well, no,
Is
both
it?
can be true.
No.
You can say I would prefer good evidence, but that said, I also haven't heard a good argument.
That's not what he said, though. Like, even he said it's because I don't have evidence, and then he said, well, there's no, and then he changed it to evidence and arguments. So it has to be like, either you say, okay, if I hear a good argument, then I'll be convinced. You can say that an argument can convince me, or you just say, then I'm just looking for evidence. I'm looking for empirical stuff. That's what's going to convince me.
Yeah,
I'm looking for.
I don't think that's a contradiction, though, Mac. I can say very, very honestly, I would need what I would consider good evidence. But that said, a good argument would be a good start, and I haven't heard one of those.
But a good argument would not count as evidence for you, right?
No, but it would
All right,
count as a good.
it is
It
then.
would count as a good start. It would count as a Okay, you have my attention. Let's continue.
But you already have like you already have the tension. You're already talking about this, unless this is all uninteresting. Uh
Well, it's
again, it's
uninteresting in that I don't believe that Christians are providing good arguments. And I would love to hear good arguments. I don't think there are good arguments.
but the thing is, you're saying that arguments are not evidence, right?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying even if you heard the best argument you've ever heard, that will be it won't move the needle at all. You'll still be an
Yeah,
atheist.
I think that's an unfair characterization. I think
No,
it's a
it's
I think it's a thing that even you wouldn't live by. So if I were to reverse that and say, what would it take for you to not believe in God? Well, you could say both, that it would take some evidence that God doesn't exist, or at least you need to give me a good argument so that, so that I can have something to consider. But to
no,
say that
no.
no single good argument that I give would convince you, and
I'm not.
therefore you're
I'm
not
not
an
saying.
honest interlocutor,
I'm not
it's
saying
not.
there's no value in good arguments. I'm saying people who say, uh, I want evidence, and then later on say, I want evidence and arguments, they don't know what they're looking for. Either say, I want empirical stuff. That's the only thing I'll accept. And then go from there. Don't don't say, okay, there are no good arguments. And then say, okay, well, if I hear a good argument, then that's going to convince me, because that's not true. It's not going to convince you
Any
that there's
more
a
than a
God.
good argument would convince you to walk away from God.
No, if I
That's
heard a
not the
good
point.
argument against Christianity, it would
Oh,
convince
really?
me.
One good argument would convince you?
Yeah, but the thing is, I've never like listened to a good argument.
So one good
From
argument would convince you to
It
not be a
would convince,
Christian.
because a
Okay,
bad
so
well, a good argument would be the evidence, right? But for atheists, it's two separate things. It's this evidence, and then there's arguments. Arguments can never be evidence, right?
okay, well then I don't know what would constitute a good argument for you, but I would rather than pursuing that say I've never heard of a good argument from Christians. There are arguments that are not as bad as some of the ones they make. So
Okay,
there,
which is
if
okay,
we're
but
grading arguments, there's some that are better than others. But I've certainly never heard an argument that would, in and of itself, be one that engenders faith.
but I don't think you're getting what I'm saying. Like, I'm saying this like, okay, take me as an example. I'm a Christian. For me to become an atheist, if you gave me an argument that proved that Christianity was false, I would become an atheist. Okay.
Give me an example of the
All
kind
right.
of argument
Wait.
that would
Like,
do
I don't,
that.
I like, I'm just giving, I can't, it's irrelevant what argument that is. I'm just saying there's an argument out there you can give me that convinces me that Christianity is false.
I don't
I would
believe
become an
it.
atheist.
I don't believe
It
you.
doesn't matter if you don't believe it or not. That's what I'm saying, right?
I
Because
don't
that's
believe that there is
what's
such. That's not how arguments work. That's not what they
yes,
are.
that's what Dan is saying. He's saying that, oh, I was a Christian, but then I started, I whatever, evolution and all these other things, and he realized he was deluded, and eventually he became an atheist, right? And I'm saying, if you have an argument like that, and you give me an argument, and it's like, oh, Christianity is false because you see, look, the resurrection didn't really happen, da 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 da. Here are the reasons. Here's the reason why Paul is fake. Here's the reason why all of the Bible is historically, like, if you like, I'm just giving an example. I'm saying give me an argument, I'll be like, okay, then Christianity is false. But for atheists, I'm not saying this applies to all atheists. I'm saying a big portion, at least the ones that I encounter, they say, I'm looking for evidence that God exists. Because the reason I'm not a Christian or I'm not a theist is because I've never seen evidence for a God. Say, okay, good. And then, okay, let's talk about these arguments. What about these arguments? Cosmological argument, all these arguments that exist. And they say, okay, great arguments, but they're not evidence. And
You're
I'm like,
talking
okay,
about
then they're not
unevidenced.
evidence.
You're talking
No,
about
but you're saying
unevidenced arguments, and you
I
should. No
you're
one
not
should
letting
be
me finish.
convinced of un. No
I'm
one should
not
be
saying
convinced.
that you should be convinced. I'm saying if you're looking for empirical evidence, then that's all you're looking for. Then that's what you're looking for. You can't say, okay, I'm looking for good arguments, because the
And I'm
arguments
saying they're
do
not mutually
nothing to
exclusive.
move the needle.
I'm saying that you're making a false dichotomy. They're not mutually exclusive. If you give
So
me,
why do guys like Dan and other people make it like they're like they're the same thing, or like they matter? Why do
I
arguments
don't
matter?
know Dan's personal motivation. I don't think he's making the best arguments that could be made, but I am telling you what people generally mean when they talk about it. And I would say Christians and atheists mean
No,
generally the same thing. That
that's not
evidence and arguments are not mutually exclusive. If you show me a piece of evidence, that is just a thing. You have to make an argument for why that evidence matters. And by the same token, if you make an argument, you have to show me evidence that that argument is true. So unevidenced arguments, they're interesting mentally, but they're not, in fact, the kind of argument that produces an evidential response. So
right.
I
And
don't think that you should not believe in God based on an argument that I make that's unevidenced any more than I should believe in God based on an
that's
argument that you make that's not evidenced.
the argument is the evidence. So like if you make an argument like it's illogical to follow God because A, B, C, D, like what evidence could you produce? What physical empirical evidence could come along with that?
Well, nothing. However, you could make similar counter arguments, as people do. You can make philosophical counter arguments to that as
But
well.
those don't mean anything to the person who says, I'm only looking for empirical evidence. Those mean nothing.
Well, when I talk about I haven't heard a good argument, I am saying that I haven't heard an evidenced argument favoring Christianity. I've heard lots of
Right.
claims, but claims are not evidence. In fact, I would argue that claims, properly understood, are not arguments either. Claims are just things that you pull out of your butt and you can say anything you want to. An argument has to be a little bit more structured and a little bit more supported and a little bit more evidenced. It's more than just a claim. So I've heard lots of good claims. I haven't heard any good arguments.
But that, again, you're missing the point. The point isn't that you haven't heard any good arguments. The point is that even if you did hear a good argument, nothing would change. Like a good argument, you're saying, comes with evidence. And that's what I'm saying, that the evidence you're looking for has to be empirical at some point, right?
I'm saying that it has to
Well,
be more
just
than mere
just
philosophy.
answer it. Does it have to be empirical in nature at some level?
I'm answering it as honestly as I can. It has to be more than mere philosophy, because mere philosophy is not settled. You can give me the best philosophical argument I've ever heard, and then I can look at the next person who gives me the best philosophical argument that I've ever heard that contradicts your philosophical argument. So mere philosophy is not
No.
enough to move the needle.
Wait, so is
It
that a yes or no? Because I'm not hearing like a clear answer.
Well, I think I've given a clear answer. I don't think that
Just
unevidenced arguments should convince one way or the other at all. And if all you have for your position are unevidenced arguments, you don't have a good
when you
argument.
say unevidence or evidence, you're talking about empirical things, right? Like things you can
I don't know that I would narrow it quite to that level. I mean, you're talking about atoms and uh things bouncing off of each other. And I'm not entirely sure that that's what I'm limiting it to. I would say that I would give a person room to make a good argument. And if they can give me an evidenced argument that does not include things that you might consider empirical things, I would still consider that.
you would
So,
consider it, but you
but
wouldn't
it has to be
accept it.
more than a claim. It has to be more
Well,
than a
for that
feeling.
person, it's not a claim. It's they're giving you evidence. But if your mind is already tuned into empiricism, like only things I can see, touch, smell, feel, and
Well, you're saying they're giving you evidence, but
do it in the lab.
I'm saying that I have not heard arguments for religion that are good arguments backed by something evidential, however we define evidential here. And I think it is a false dichotomy to say, well, uh, it either has to be golf balls or it has to be ideas. And
Well, how do you
that's
define
not,
evidence then?
I don't think that's how most of us think.
How do you define evidence?
I think I'm going to, for the sake of the audience, say rewind, rewind and listen to the last 15 minutes of discussion, because I think that I've been over that pretty well. And if I
Well,
haven't,
okay.
then I will
Well,
just look like an idiot, like I'm dodging a question. I think
no,
that I
it's
have been over that pretty
I,
well.
I don't I'm the one asking, and I don't think you have. But like again, at the end of the day, it comes down to what someone like you got to know what you're looking for. Like if I say, "Oh, I lost a pair of keys," I got to know what the keys look like in order for me to find them. Like, oh, like atheists say, "I'm looking for evidence for God." Okay, what will you accept? Oh, I'll only accept empirical evidence. But then it switches up and says arguments too, because that's what he said. You can rewind the video. He said, I've never, like, he changes it from evidence and then evidence and arguments. If arguments aren't
Yeah,
convincing,
I'm
then they're
not
not relevant
I'm
at
not
all. That's
arguing
my point.
what he thinks in his head.
Okay, well, I'm
I'm arguing
interacting with what he says.
the way you are trying to paste this on all people who think.
No, I'm not saying all people. I'm
I'm
saying the
saying that
opposite.
it is a false dichotomy to say that it has to be either golf balls or ideas.
No, I'm saying based on what he said, like taking you out of the equation. What Dan said was reason I'm not a believer is because I have no evidence. All right. Statement one. Statement two. The reason I'm not a believer is because I don't have evidence and
And I
arguments.
would argue that statement one would encompass statement two. Now, once again, that may not be true in
That's
his
not
mind and
for
his way of
everyone.
thinking, but I would
Mhm.
not hear it the way you heard it. I did. I
Because
certainly.
someone who discards philosophical arguments is like that stuff. Most of it goes over my head. I don't care about it. Just give me something I can hold and touch and see. That person is not in the same sphere as someone who says, if I
Yeah,
hear a good argument,
that's also not a fair.
then
That's
I'll
not a fair
believe. No,
characterization of what people are saying.
I'm not, I'm giving an example of someone who says something like this. Someone who says, I'll only believe if I see evidence that I can touch, smell, see, feel, test, versus a person who says, I'll only believe if I hear, if I get that, and also if I hear a good argument. Those are two different people. They're not the same person.
Well, they could be, but I also think you're creating a straw
The-
man here.
How
Uh,
is it a straw man to
because
represent?
if someone, even I could say this, if someone says that I need to see something empirical, it is more than likely because the thing being claimed is something empirical. And so if they are claiming something that has flesh and bones and works like a golf ball, then I want to see something that looks like a golf ball. All right. So you can't make that claim of empiricism and then prove it with ideas. Okay,
No, well,
if your claim is idea based, then great. We're in the realm of ideas. We can talk about that and test which ideas are better. But if you're claiming golf balls,
well,
there better damn well
Christians
be a golf ball that I
don't
can see.
claim that Christianity is going to be like a scientific experiment where God appears to you and you're able to run all your tests and ask all your questions. That's never been the claim, but that's how atheists treat it as
I don't
like,
think you've heard enough sermons if you think that's ever been the claim.
that's not fair and that's not true. But the thing is, like, I'm just going off my experience, which is valid because I do interact with atheists. I'm not even speaking about anyone in particular. I'm just saying there are people I've interacted with who say, I don't care about all these arguments. Just if God is real, he should appear so that everyone can know. That's who I'm referring to. If that's not you, then it's not you. But I'm also saying there are people who say, okay, if I hear an argument that's convincing, then that will make me a believer. Or other people say, hey, I only just need a subjective experience. If God were to make it that he like make himself so real to me that I would not know that it's him, then I will believe. So different classes for different people, but it's not all the same thing.
Right.
It's
And
not that all
I think you're
atheists are
making,
saying.
I think you're generalizing in
I
a
am
way that
doing
is
the opposite of generalizing. I'm saying there's different classes. I'm not saying all atheists are in the same box. That's the opposite of what I'm saying. That's the opposite of generalizing.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go back and rewind the last
No, I'm saying
this
it right now.
20 minutes.
The
I'm talking to
opposite
the
of
audience here.
generalizing is saying all atheists are the same. I'm saying the exact opposite of that. I'm
Great.
saying there's some atheists who want
And I
evidence
recognize that there are differences
only.
among people, and there are people who make good arguments and bad arguments about things, but I'm saying your argument about arguments versus evidence is it felt itself too general, and it's a false dichotomy.
It's not.
Uh,
I presented three different options. I didn't I didn't give a dichotomy. I gave three options. And 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 so even then my point is this. Someone has to do some introspection and figure out what it is that they actually want. Do they want empirical evidence only? Do they want empirical evidence and arguments? Do they want arguments only? Do they want subjective experience only? Do they want all of that all together? They have to figure it out. If you don't know what you're looking for, you'll never find it. That's it. That's all I'm saying. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial.
sure, more on the board. If there's an after show, more on the after show.
Yeah, there's a 100% chance someone's going to take this out of context, but it's whatever.
Okay.
Free will. I'm not talking about human free will, and that's a big debate whether we have it or not. Even atheists disagree among themselves. But God, presumably, this being is a personal being with free will who knows his own future decisions. In order to have free will, whatever that means, there has to be a period of indeterminacy during which you truly do have options. I could choose coffee or tea. I could choose this or that. But if you know your future options, you have no choice. You have no freedom. You are not a free personal agency. So if your definition of God is that God is omniscient and free, he cannot exist. He's a married bachelor. I know theologians try to tinker with definitions. By the way, if God cannot change what he knows he's going to do tomorrow at 12 noon, that also puts some limits on his omnipotence, doesn't it? A lot of these arguments from design and teleology, for example, suffer from begging the question. It's rather like the man who is amazed. Look at how all these rivers were made to flow right along the state boundaries. How do you explain that? It must have been a massive feat of engineering, a huge economic development. How did they get those rivers to do that? Isn't that incredible? And yet that's how a lot of this teleological thinking is among how did the human eye evolve? How do you explain that? There must have been design behind it. It does look like design, doesn't it? Those rivers look like they were designed to flow right along those boundaries. It's an upside down kind of thinking, and in a sense begs the question. The whole idea that in some of these teleological arguments that complexity requires a designer, and Richard somewhere here pointed out in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, anything that is complex enough to design functional complexity, any deity who could design has to have a mind that is at least as functionally complex as the thing that he designed, right? If your premise is that functional complexity requires a designer, if that's your premise, then the mind of that deity also must, by that premise, require a designer. And you get into this infinite regress of, well, then God needed a bigger God and a bigger God. I think most scientists prefer to just stop with what we do know rather than speculate endlessly about a mountain of turtles. Another lack that takes against the evidence for existence of a God is the lack of agreement among believers. If there is a deity that you love and care about, why do no two believers agree on any social or moral issue? You name it. Gay marriage, doctor-assisted suicide, stem cell research, death, the war, you name these social issues we're struggling with. You find devout, praying, Bible-believing Christians on both sides of those issues. Paul wrote in the Bible, God is not the author of confusion. But can you think of a single book that's caused more confusion than that Bible? They don't agree. Why not? Why shouldn't it be clear? Why shouldn't this all-loving, all-caring deity make it clear to us? It is not. They have fought with each other over these issues. The 30 Years' War, which was based to some degree on the confessional differences over infant baptism and transubstantiation. People were killed. John Calvin had his friend Servetus killed over a simple misplacement of a preposition. The lack of agreement among believers is a serious problem towards the existence of an all-loving, all-caring God. And then, of course, the problem of evil. And our previous speaker pointed out that that is probably the Achilles heel in theology. All you have to do is walk into any children's hospital, and you know there's no God. At least no good God. Maybe there's an evil God. Those children are dying at the same random rate, even though their parents are desperately praying, desperately loving those kids, wanting some kind of divine intervention. And yet, as Ann Gaylor says, who's the former president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, nothing fails like prayer. That would be evidence. If you could give some scientific evidence that prayer actually makes an organic difference, not just makes you feel better, but an actual difference in the real world, that would be something to put on the table. The fact that that's not put on the table shows that prayer is pretty much talking to yourself. Finally, there's no need for a belief in God. Millions, tens of millions of people on this planet live happy lives, productive lives, moral lives, purposeful lives, lives of hope and meaning, without deluding ourselves that there are these invisible personalities populating.
Were you trying to stop there?
No. Did you have something to say?
Nope, not yet. All right.
Some
Okay.
supernatural realm. We are quite happy, thank you, without that belief. Based on all of that, it is more likely to reject the proposition than to accept it. Thank you.
Let's delve into the next set of arguments put forth by Dan Baker. He questions the existence of God based on the lack of real evidence. He even goes as far as saying that if there was any substantial evidence for God, someone would have won a Nobel Prize for proving it. Well, that's a bold statement, isn't it? But here's the thing. The search for evidence is ongoing, and it's not as simple as winning a prize. Faith and belief often transcend scientific proof, and that's where the beauty of spirituality lies. Now, Dan also challenges the reliability of the Bible, particularly using the resurrection of Jesus Christ as an example. He asks how we can connect the dots and find the reliability of the Bible in such an event. But let me ask you this. Throughout history, we've seen countless testimonies and historical records pointing to the life and death of Jesus Christ. These are not just mere stories. They are supported by historical facts. As the story of the rich man and Lazarus suggests, even if someone were to rise from the dead, some people might still choose not to believe. Sometimes it's not about the lack of evidence, but rather the resistance to believe. Moving on to the problem of God's attributes and the design argument, Dan brings up an interesting point about free will and omniscience. He argues that if God knows the future, then how can we truly have free will? Well, let's consider this. Free will means that we have the ability to make choices, and with choices come consequences. It's not about God preventing us from doing wrong, but rather about us taking responsibility for our actions. And as for the complexity of the world, the design argument can be a bit perplexing. If we argue that a complex world requires a complex designer, then who designed the mind of God? But here's the thing. God, by definition, is not created. He is the ultimate creator, beyond our comprehension. Lastly, Dan raises the problem of evil and the lack of agreement among believers. He questions how the Bible, supposed to be a book of divine guidance, has caused so much confusion. And he points to the existence of suffering and pain in the world, particularly when he mentions children's hospitals. These are weighty issues, and we can't ignore the pain and suffering that exists. However, it's important to remember that this is not an easy question to answer because it is not an intellectual one, but of emotions. We will bring in John Lennox to address the problem of suffering and present their arguments for the existence of God.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll use one of mine here, and then we'll be even. There's a lot that I could have commented on. I think the one thing that I will respond to in the commentators' comments is this idea that atheists wouldn't believe no matter what. This is an ad hominem attack. And I tend to point this out whenever it comes up because it should be pointed out and it shouldn't be allowed. There needs to be more pushback on this. And so he mentions a story of the rich man and Lazarus, most likely never intended to be a real story, a fable, if you will. But sure. And Jesus is telling, or Abraham is telling the rich man that even if someone were to rise from the dead, your family wouldn't believe. They wouldn't believe. So don't worry. They're beyond hope. Nothing would convince them. This is ad hominem. Either they're too stupid to be convinced, or they're too sinful to be convinced. They're too insincere to be convinced. There's no good way to frame this. Now, I would say, if we're just speaking to the evidence and someone rising from the dead, this is where, again, I say evidence and arguments have to work together. They're not mutually exclusive. If you say someone rose from the dead, I would need to know a lot more about that context, because people get revived in hospitals all the time, in situations where, even, a few decades ago, they would have been declared dead. And so technically we're looking at a resurrection. Someone has risen from the dead. Does that convince me that there's a God? No, it does not. So we would need a lot more context around this rising from the dead. If you tell me in a place where people are heavily superstitious and praying to Baal or some, Indian gods, or to nature, doing some witchcraft, and then someone rises from the dead in that context, what should I believe about that? Should I believe then in the deity that they believed in? Should I believe in Baal? Should I believe in Ganesh? What should I believe about that? Well, I would believe that someone rose from the dead. I don't know what system that I would take wholesale and say, well, all of the claims in that system are validated because this person rose from the dead. So in that sense, it wouldn't be good evidence to validate all claims of a given system, but it would definitely be good evidence of something that I did not understand about the universe before. And we definitely have a conversation worth having, and I have some new paths to explore. But to say that, that there's nothing that would convince that person, which is how many Christians operate in the first place, is, I think, disingenuous. And for my part, as I get older, I just don't want to waste my time talking to people who argue that way.
Well, there's nothing disingenuous about it if you go ahead and say, well, like it only cracks open the door. So, like I've mentioned this before, the Atheist Experience did a poll of all its viewers, well, most of its viewers, and asked them, if you found out that there's a God tomorrow, would you worship him? 85% said no. 15% said yes. So 85% said no, nothing, even if they, without a shadow of a doubt, found out that there is a God, nothing about their lives currently would change. So it's not an ad hominem to point out that 85% number is significant, and that when someone says, well, I'm not part of the 85%, I'm part of the 15%, saying that there's a big portion of people who say the existence of God would change nothing about my life. Pointing that out is not an ad hominem. Like, if you want to talk about evidence, there's empirical evidence. You can go on their YouTube channel. The poll, I believe, is still there. 85% said nothing would change.
It is an ad hominem.
So,
and
so
I,
it's not an ad hominem to go by what
it's
people
a bad,
say.
It's even that poll is a bad argument. Let's take the poll at face
Well,
value.
it's not an argument.
Hang on. Let's take it at face value. All right. I'm not even going to argue that the poll is not a good poll. All right. Let's say it's a great poll, best poll ever. And 85% of people say that if you prove there was a God, they wouldn't worship him. Heck, we don't even need the poll. I can say, if you could prove positively that there was a God, I wouldn't worship him. I certainly wouldn't be. Hang on. You're not understanding.
Well, I give you time to finish your point, but all right, you can tuck into the time. All right.
Okay, yeah, because this is my stoppage, and I'm going to get it from take it for all it's worth. Thank you. So, I am. What I am saying is that would not, in fact, be proof that I am disingenuous. That is mixing two different things together. It would be like saying, if I could prove to you that a gallon of milk was only $1 a gallon, and knowing that, you still wouldn't invest $1 million in a milk producing factory. To prove that somehow you're just beyond the scope of evidence for good investing, that would be silly.
That makes no sense.
No, well, let me explain to you why it's the same thing, though. Because you believe in the devil, but you don't worship him. And so the devil would be, to me, just another God form. If you tell me that there is a God in a way that convinces me that a God exists, that does not then make the logical leap to, okay, then I've got to worship this God.
And that's the point of the parable that you're saying is an ad hominem. It's not ad hominem. It's proving the point.
No,
it's saying that
it's not.
You're saying
look,
it doesn't
even if you don't want to listen,
anything.
I think that there are probably people in the audience who do. You are mixing two different things. Simply proving that a God exists look, that would be great, and I wish that was the conversation that we could have.
Well, the
just talking about the world where we all know that God exists.
God exists,
hang on,
you won't worship him.
That's right,
that
because
the purpose.
Wrong. You don't want to hear this because you know it destroys your argument.
No, okay,
so listen.
I listened to you.
No, you haven't.
I was giving my rebuttal,
because I still haven't gotten it out.
And you interrupt.
I still haven't gotten it out.
Then I
because
can
you don't want to hear it.
Right?
Here's the thing. Simply knowing that a God exists is not enough information to declare worship for that God. You would have to know a great deal more than mere existence. Knowing that I exist is not enough to worship me, because you would say, well, but you're not worthy of worship. Great. That is correct. But how do you know that I am not worthy of worship? Because you know more things than that I exist. Knowing that God exists does not mean that it's worthy of worship any more than knowing that a gallon of milk is a dollar means that you should invest $1 million in a milk factory. That these are different things, and one does not suggest the other. Proving that God exists begins a conversation of whether this God should be worshiped or not. But it is not some automatic slam dunk. Oh, he exists, therefore he should be worshiped because I exist and I shouldn't be worshiped. So when people say that, when that question is asked, I think it's an invalid question. Even if the polling information is right, I think the 85% who are saying, no, I wouldn't worship him merely on the basis that he exists, are correct. And those of you who would say that, oh, well, if God exists, then I would worship him, are incorrect. You are being presumptuous and pretending to know things about this God as facts that are not yet entered into evidence. The only piece of evidence we're talking about is his mere existence. Not enough.
Are you finished?
Yep.
All right, so I can speak uninterrupted. The point is this: it's resistance to belief. People will say, if I found out God exists, I'll worship him today. Now you said no, that wouldn't change anything. And that's right. Like, that's what I was saying
I
before.
didn't say it
with
wouldn't
the
change anything.
wait, already interrupting. Okay.
Okay, but
Bro, okay,
you're
we
also
can
you're
no,
misrepresenting
because
me. I didn't say that.
you misrepresented a few things, and I ceded my, like, do you still want to keep going with the video? Because I let you talk, man.
Right, but
And
I'm not going to let
I'm
you
not
I'm not going to let you
getting a
say
two
things about me
sentences
that
in.
aren't true.
Well, you said
I
things
didn't
about
say
what
that
I believe
nothing.
that are not true, and I'm trying to correct them in my response
Okay,
section.
well, you can't
Right?
correct
So
them by
that's how it
saying things
works.
about me that aren't true.
Well, then let me finish, and then you can correct me after. Don't interrupt. Like, that's not how it works. Like, even in this video, that's not how they're dressed up and everything. And the guy talks, he says all his wrong things, and then another guy stands up. It's not like back and forth like you're making it. You're making it ugly and dirty, and it's not helpful. So if I say something wrong, then correct me during your time. But here's the point. You said something about what I said that's not true, and I'm trying to correct it right now. So now I have to go back to what I was saying.
Yeah, what did I say about you that wasn't true?
You were saying that, oh, you're putting all atheists, like it's that you were saying that the poll, the people who said 85%, that they're correct, and the ones who said 15% are wrong. And that's not true. That's not how polls work. It's not a right or wrong answer. It's people saying, if I found out this was true, if I found out that there's a being who is in charge of everything and is the arbiter of all reality, would I be compelled to know who they are? Which is what worship is. Worship isn't simply just bowing down and curtailing and just being a submissive person who has no independence or rational thought or freedom. It's about bringing yourself into submission or conformity with that being. That's what worship is. 15% say that would be, yes, that would be the decision to make. 85% say they'd still need more. So, like, now let's start a debate with God, so that God has to justify himself to me, right? And so, like, if that's your position, then there's like 20,000 steps or 20 steps or whatever to get you where you need to be. And the problem is, like, you say, okay, well, I'm looking for evidence for God. There's no evidence, there's no arguments, and even if there was an argument, I still wouldn't do this. And it's like, okay, what is the point then of of having a physical or whatever kind of manifestation of God if you're still going to be stubborn and say, I'm going to do things my way because that's what works for me? Like, that's an illogical thing, and that comes from resisting belief. You're resisting taking your life and putting it under conformity or submission to another being's plans. This being supersedes you in everything. He gave you your own life. He gave you your mind, your reason, your everything. And you're saying, I'm going to resist that no matter what. And that just shows the depths of how much sin can just disrupt someone's mindset, that they say that even if God were to appear and make himself known to me, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with him. I would only I would ask him, I would want to get to know him better. Or some people say, like, I'm not even interested in that. So this whole debate of, does God exist, does God not exist, it's like more layers have been added to it. Because when classical atheists used to talk about this issue, they never used to say what people are saying today. They never used to say that, oh, if God exists, then it doesn't matter. They said, if God exists, then everything changes. Goodbye to nihilism. Goodbye to all these other philosophies about, how life is meaningless, but you have to try and make it meaningful. But that's not the tune being sung today. It's a different thing. And that's the whole of it.
Okay, you're wrong. And you're mixing categories. And so there is a good reason why there is so much heat
There is.
around this discussion right now. So let me point out where there is a shift. What I said was based off of what the commentator said, which is based off of what Luke said that Jesus said. And so if we get back to that kernel, it is the idea that even if someone rose from the dead, those hard-hearted family members of yours still wouldn't believe. Believe what? Believe what? What is in
Believe
view
that they
here?
need to repent and
Hang
believe
on.
in God. They
That
wouldn't
was a
do that.
rhetorical question. I'm not
And you
asking you for
just
anything.
proved it. You just said I wouldn't believe.
I'm not asking you. This
No,
is
you just said you wouldn't believe. So
I am.
so it's true.
You're
Yeah.
not paying attention. The thing that they would believe in that context, I think, is pretty important. If someone rose from the dead, then they would believe that God was real. They would believe that. Now, that's one level of belief. If someone rises from the dead, they believe that God is real. And that seems to be, someone can correct me in the comments, what Luke is suggesting here. And so
Rich man
these
wasn't an
people,
atheist.
and so these people wouldn't believe what they didn't believe in Jesus' message. They didn't believe that Jesus was a messenger of this God. They didn't believe anything like that. So what I am suggesting on level one is that someone rising from the dead, let's stick with that for a moment. Someone rising from the dead is not, in fact, evidence of a specific religious claim. There are lots of religious claims and lots of spiritual powers that people believe in. So if I saw someone rise from the dead, what I would immediately believe is that what I understand about life and death is wrong.
Okay,
I
name
do
another
not. I
religion
do
because you keep
not believe. Hang on.
I've let you go on with this for a while.
No,
Name another
no.
religion
Look,
that has the
I
same.
gave you a good long time there.
It wasn't
So
that long, but you keep
it
saying that if I saw in another religion, what other religion? It's only Christianity that makes
if
that claim.
hang on, rising from the dead does not give Christianity or any other religion a blank check that says everything else I've claimed is also correct. So that doesn't mean that I become a Christian if I see someone rise from the dead. It definitely means that I am wrong about how I think the universe works, though. And I would be very much interested in finding out how, in fact, the universe works and why I was so wrong in the first place. But that's one topic. What you did was you shifted by
Don't
bringing up
misalign what
hang
I
on,
said
hang on.
with what you think I'm saying.
You
Just say
brought
this is
up
how I understand it.
you brought up the poll about people who were
And
asked.
you interrupted.
Hang on. No, I let you give that whole speech. You brought up the poll about how 85%, if they saw proof that there was God, that they wouldn't worship him. That is a secondary issue. It's not the same issue. It's a different issue. It's an interesting issue, but issue number one, does someone rising from the dead prove the existence of the Christian God? Issue number two, if you prove the existence of the Christian God, does that equal worshiping that God? Okay, those are two different things, should be discussed very separately, that you kind of mixed and matched in that conversation.
No,
And so I'm trying to
stop
respond to
lying.
all of this. I'm not lying. People can roll back the
They
tape.
can roll it back, but you're just straight up. Because first of all, I started talking about that, then you interrupted, and I didn't even get to make it out in full. What I was saying is this: 85% of people who listen to the atheist experience say, even if they found out that God existed, that would, you're saying it's separate issues. Well, the person who made the poll doesn't see it as a separate issue. So you're trying to flip the blame.
It is
and make
very
it,
much a
and
separate
make it-
issue from what is
look,
being discussed on
You're
this
trying
show.
to flip it and make it that Christians are the ones who made the poll. Are we the ones who run that YouTube channel? No, because that's how lots
You're-
of people. I'd even say
that
that's
has
how
has
most
nothing to
people
do with
see
it.
it.
That has absolutely zero things to do with
Yes,
a person
it does.
rising from the dead.
Well, that's
proving
not what I'm
Christianity.
talking about. You're the one
Okay,
who's fixated on that.
Hank, well,
I'm talking about.
I'm fixated on it because that's
You're
what
talking
was
about
said in
ad
the show.
hominems and resistance to belief, and I'm saying if 85% of people say, atheists say, if I found out without a shadow of a doubt that God exists, then that wouldn't change anything. Then that's not an ad
that's not
hominem.
a resistance to belief.
Yes, it is.
No,
You're
it's not.
resisting belief
No, it is.
that
No,
your
they do
life
believe.
would change. No,
If
it's not
God
belief
showed
anymore.
up, they would believe that
It's-
God is there.
Well,
They would
it's
not worship
belief in the
him.
sense-
Hang on. Believing that God exists is not the same as worshiping God.
Well, you're
To you it is.
misunderstanding what
To
I'm saying.
you it is.
No,
you can't
I'm-
see
I'm
any,
going
you can't
by
see
what the
any
show
space between those
the
two ideas.
channel. You're not even listening at all. You just want to say what you want to say.
You're not
The
listening.
YouTube channel,
So I can
the
say
atheist
that
YouTube channel put out the poll. It's an atheist channel. It's
it
not
does
Christians
not matter
saying,
that it's an atheist brand. It
well,
has
that's-
absolutely
but you're
nothing to do
saying-
with what
you're
I was
saying
saying
it's
here.
Christians who are mixing them the two things together. It's not Christians. It's people.
No, it's you. You are the one who's bringing up this
I'm
side
not
issue that
doing
has
that
nothing to do with
because
what's being
it's-
discussed on the
You're
show.
calling it a side issue because you don't like what it
No,
implies.
I'm calling it a side issue because that's not what's
No,
being discussed.
It has everything to do with what the guy was saying. The guy who was
It has
commenting
nothing
on
to
the
do with
video,
what the guy was saying.
because you don't like the implication.
You don't
guy
want
is-
to
you're
you don't want
like-
to you don't want to talk
you-
about the
you
video
said-
because what, it makes you look
no,
bad.
I'm talking about the video right now. I'm saying the
You're
guy was saying,
not.
okay. Well, is that how is this show is gonna keep going? Because you're saying, oh,
Well-
you're not. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. I'm interacting with
Hey,
what's going on.
when did this atheist poll come up? Did it come up in the video?
No, it didn't
Did
come up,
I
but
bring it up?
I was bringing it up as part of my answer to the guy who's saying, the guy who just commented that, hey, even if people rise from the dead, it's a resistance
Right, and that's
to
not what this
belief.
poll was. This poll wasn't about people rising from the dead. Then
No, it's about resisting belief, which you're not.
no, it's not
listening
about
to.
resisting belief. No,
You are resistant to the belief that
Wrong.
God exists. You're resistant to the belief that
wrong,
God,
because
is
the
worthy of
poll.
worship.
This is
You're resistant to so
we're
many
never going to
things.
make it this way. The poll
No,
was
because
not
you-
about whether you believe that God exists. The
I'm the
poll
one who
itself-
brought it up.
hang
I know
on.
what it says.
Right,
You're-
and you
no, I'm
and
not
you're
gonna hang on
you
because
are
I let you
misrepresenting it.
talk. No, I'm. How can I
You are
misrepresent
misrepresenting
some-
the poll that you're talking
No,
about. It's
you're
not about
telling
whether
me what
people would
I'm-
believe. People can believe in God and not want to worship him.
That's not what the poll was asked. The poll is saying, if you found out without a shadow of doubt, would you worship God? 85% said no. You're like saying, oh, you're just mixing it too because that's what Christians do. And I'm saying,
Did you just cut yourself off?
65% are correct. That's not how polls work.
You
They've
blanked
never
out.
worked like that.
You
They'll
blanked,
never work like that.
Matt, you blanked out for like 10 or 15 seconds. I don't know what you said. No one knows what you said.
That's fine. But what I'm saying is,
You're blanked out again. I cannot hear you.
writer to Matt Dillahunty and ask him why he did that. Don't get angry and say, "Oh, you're just ad hominem. You're just straw manning. You're just making things
Okay,
like
I
all
think
together."
I think I
You're-
have the thread of what you're saying, but you keep blanking out for long periods of time. You can't be heard while you're ranting. So, I know what the poll is.
If
I-
you say, "Can you hear me?"
I could in and out. You're in and out. What? Let me make a suggestion. Step out of the podcast. Just close this link and reopen it, and come back. Sometimes that will clear out cache issues, but you keep blanking out for long periods of time where you're talking, and so it's not not doing you any good. Okay. So while he is out, once again, this is not a question of whether people would believe, at least this Matt Dillahunty poll. It's a matter of whether believing you would worship. Completely different issue. Completely different issue. It is not a matter of if you have good evidence to believe what you believe, would you believe? And that, in fact, is what the passage in Luke is suggesting, that they wouldn't believe even if they had good evidence. That's the ad hominem that I'm talking about.
No, it's not an ad hominem. It's not an ad hominem because it's addressing the very same thing that you said. The rich man, first of all, it needs to be looked at in context. The rich man was mistreating the poor man, and then they both die. They go both. The rich man goes to hell, and he's still he's worried about his family members, and he says, you know, just send someone from the dead to convince them. And he says, if the scriptures won't convince them, then someone rising from the dead won't. And you've proved
Which is a
that
bad
point.
argument.
You said if someone came back from the dead, it wouldn't convince you. So you're proving the story right. You're saying it would just make you
the
wonder,
story,
like, what's
if
the
we want to
universe
talk
like?
about the story presents a very bad argument, logically speaking.
Because
You
it
said the
represents
rich
you
man. You said the rich
accurately.
man was mistreating the poor man, and I would question that too. How was he mistreating him?
Are we going to talk about that parable now? Because the thing is,
Well, I'm just trying to come in. I'm just trying to follow your thread here.
No, I'm following your thread, and then you're changing the script. Like the thing is this: if someone comes back from the dead, it wouldn't convince you. Yes or no?
Okay.
Yes. Right? That's it. That's the point.
Convince me of what?
That whatever the afterlife exists, hell is real, heaven is real, all these things, it wouldn't convince you. You just said
Okay,
that, right?
someone coming back from the dead
It
wouldn't
would only
convince me of the.
convince
No,
you that
hang on.
it would only convince you that the universe works in a different way or something.
It would
whatever.
convince me that someone came back from the dead. I'm not sure what else it would necessarily have to convince me of. What is the logical necessity that it follows with someone coming back from the dead?
What's an example of a logical necessity?
What is
what
what
does
I'm
that mean?
asking? I'm
Because
asking
you're
you.
just saying actions
Hang
are just
on.
actions.
This is a good question, I think. If someone comes back from the dead, what is the logical, epistemological necessity due to that someone coming back from the dead?
A random person, or are we talking about Jesus Christ? A random person coming back from the dead, what would that would prove that a random person came from the dead? But like, that's not the claim that Christians make. They don't say, "Oh, Jesus came back from the dead," therefore, like,
Well,
unless
the
like,
story of the rich man and Lazarus doesn't mention Jesus either.
what's your point?
I'm trying to figure out what yours is.
Well,
I'm
your
saying,
point is this. Your point is, if someone, I keep saying rich man, if someone comes back from the dead, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't prove anything. It only proves that they came back from the dead. It only proves that, which reminds me of another conversation where someone said, even if everything in the Bible is true, and Jesus rose from the dead, and they were there, and they saw Jesus, it was like, yes, everything is true. They said that wouldn't prove anything. That wouldn't prove Jesus is God. That wouldn't prove anything. And
I don't know
I'm
who this
guessing,
person is you're talking
well, I'm
about,
not
and so
saying,
I'm not
well,
going
I
to
don't,
address that.
okay, then, well, you don't have to address it if you don't want to, but I'm just saying, if that's you, then there's nothing that can convince you. That's what that parable is. That it's catered to that person who says, even if the Bible is true, I don't care.
I
If
think
that's
I
not
think
you,
I
then it's
said
not your problem.
when I was responding on point to the commentator, I'm not entirely sure even what the parable is saying that the man needs to be convinced of. So the rich man was not mistreating Lazarus at all. He was rich and
Really?
Lazarus was poor. That's not a mistreatment.
You need to go read the story again because you don't.
Many times.
Well, how then? You still don't.
And me not bringing beggars into my house to feed them is not me mistreating beggars. So
That's not what the story says. But
that's the story.
you've just made up a new version.
That said, Lazarus is saying, and again, the interpretation of this conversation from the fire to Abraham's bosom is a little bit muddled in my own mind. What the rich man seems to be saying is, I've got family members who don't need to end up in this place, and I don't want them to end up in this place. And so, why don't you, send someone and tell them, uh, warn them about. I don't quite understand what they need to be told about or warned about, because as you said during an earlier exchange, the rich man wasn't an atheist. I think that's probably right. But he also wasn't a Christian, and he may not have been a good Jew. I'm not even sure that he wasn't a good Jew. So I'm not entirely sure what basis he ended up in hell in this story. And then when he's saying, well, go back and tell my family members so that they don't end up here, I'm not entirely sure what it is meant for, Abraham to go back and tell his family members. And then
What does this have to do with anything? That is such a long rabbit trail.
When Abraham says they have the scriptures, that should be enough. That's a bad argument. And then he tops it off with the ad hominem. If someone comes back from the dead, they still wouldn't believe. Believe what? I'm not entirely sure. But so this is a very confusing story at pretty much every level. And so if you're telling me, and I'm just trying to put myself in the framework of the story, which is what the commentator has brought up as proof somehow that I wouldn't believe in God, which I'm not entirely sure is what that story's about anyway. If someone rose from the dead, I am simply saying that a random person, as suggested in this story, rising from the dead would not prove the Christian claims. It would prove that a random person rose from the dead. And so, great. However, if you proved to me that God existed by some means that I considered proof, if God showed up by, which would be a really good proof for me, I would no longer have the category of not believing in God. I would not be an atheist. I would definitely believe in God. That doesn't mean I would worship him. And so bringing in this non sequitur, this poll of atheists who are saying, if I knew that God existed, I wouldn't worship them. I am saying that that is a correct stance to take. Simply because he exists doesn't mean you know enough about him to worship him.
What advantage, can you answer this question? What advantage is there in knowing that God exists and not worshiping him versus knowing he doesn't exist and not worshiping him? What's the advantage of one over the other?
I don't know. I know you and I don't worship you. Should I?
So like when you say, well, I want evidence that God exists, but well, that's not gonna move the needle in terms of getting me to even at least consider worshiping him. It's not going to do anything for it's not going to do any of that.
Okay, if the only
then
goal,
there is no,
if the only goal is to worship God, if that's the only goal God has in revealing himself is to get people to worship him, then I would say that he's got a bad goal. I would think that the goal would be to get people to know him and to have a relationship, an honest relationship based on
do you think
knowing him.
God needs your approval?
No, God doesn't need anybody's approval.
Right.
He can do whatever he wants to.
He doesn't need anyone's
If he exists,
approval.
he can crush me like a bug right now. That would not mean that you should worship him.
When you say, well, I really want to know if God exists. And then you say, well, it's not going to make a difference. Then
no, I never said that. You keep saying that. What I say is that doesn't mean I will worship him. That doesn't mean that it would make a difference. The fact that I know you exist makes a difference in my life.
Let's say Tom says, if God exists, well, whatever, I don't care. Doesn't matter to me.
If that person says that, then what advantage is there in them moving from being where they are versus knowing they're in that square, they're in square zero. Now the only thing that's changed is that, okay, they know. They,
Yeah, so we are having that cutting in and out problem again. But yeah, I don't understand
shift to
why.
change.
I don't understand why why the somehow natural and only sensible goal to knowing that God exists means that I worship him.
Because it changes
Those
everything.
two things, well, no, change. Yeah, things would change. It doesn't mean that I would
Everything.
worship him. And it seems like
No, well, like worship.
it seems like the only goal that you think is appropriate, the only end result to knowing God is worshiping him. And if you don't agree in advance that you would worship him, then you
And
don't
we've
get to
been
know
dying.
him.
What?
That seems to be what you're saying every time you say it. I mean, you're consistent about it.
What am I saying? Yes,
It's
because you can't separate the two. You're trying to separate them.
to know him is to worship him.
No, knowing him would entail worshiping, like
No,
bringing.
okay, that's where we disagree. I look, I really wish we could argue
Why
on
should I
the,
care? Why should I do this? I'm a free being. I get to do what I want with my life. If you want to crush me like a bug, you can do that. If I want to keep living my life, I want to live. I can do that, right? That's what you're saying. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know because I missed like 30 seconds of what you said. And so I only caught the last bit. But I think the answer is no. I think the answer, if I caught enough of it, is no. And I think
Hello?
what is befuddling to me is this tie, this somehow necessary tie that you make between knowledge of existence and worship. And it just reminds me of the lyrics of the old country song that to know me is to love me. Um, it, that's not true. To know me might be to hate me. Uh, and I could say, you know, maybe there's someone who wants to introduce me to one of their friends, and I would say, hang on, do they love me? Will they agree to love me if I introduce myself? That would be absurd. And yet you're making this connection with God.
Well, God isn't your friend that you just or a stranger you get introduced to. Again, that's part of the stuff it's all so separated. Everything is all it's like separated. Everything is separated. It has to be like you have to reinvent the wheel pretty much from the beginning.
No,
And
you're
you're
defining
just like
God
saying
in a
like, oh,
way that kind of entails that part of God's definition is he who is worshiped. And so
no,
to believe in God, you must believe in he who is worshiped.
no,
And
I'm saying the only advantage, the only reason someone would want to know, maybe like this is not, I'm not clearly not true for you, but I'm saying you are in line with the cosmic creator of the universe and his purposes and his will. Being in alignment with that is the greatest thing that can ever happen for a person versus, keep living a materialistic life, existing in the here and now until the day you die. Like, okay, you can be conformed to the laws of nature and your own whims and your own purposes versus being conformed to the purposes of God, who created everything, who knows everything, who, according to Christian claims, has good plans for those who trust in him. And someone says, well, if I'm not talking about some metaphysical, philosophical God out there, I'm talking about the God of the Bible. And that's who the atheist experience is talking about. That's who that's what this debate is about.
okay,
And
so
you're saying,
you're saying that part of the definition of God that has been proven is everything that has been said about him in the Bible.
I don't understand that question.
When you say the God of the Bible, you're saying that there's
That's the working operation we're going with. That's the assumption, maybe.
Not necessarily for me, but even there is a lot of
Okay.
there's a lot of room there for confusion. So let's say
Well,
God of the Bible in some vague way, because we all understand God of the Bible very differently. So this God is there, and I get to meet with him and talk to him, and he'll talk to me for 5 minutes. I'm going to find out which God he is. Is this the God who flooded the universe? Or did that not happen? Is this the God who wiped out the Canaanites and told Abraham to kill his kid, or did that not happen? Are those exaggerations? Is this the, what exactly is it? Who exactly is it? So just because you have introduced me to a God, let's just say minimally, this is a God who created the universe, and that's what I know. That's what I believe. I believe that this God created the universe. I don't know anything about him other than he created the universe. And you're saying that I've got to align my will with his creative plan. I don't even know if he's good, because there's so much about the universe that isn't. And so I don't have enough information. And the only way for what you're saying to make sense is if you are wrapping all of that up definitionally into God. You're not saying that I have evidence that God exists. You're saying that I believe the entire Christian package, or I believe in nothing.
that's nothing. That's not what I said. Like, where did you get all of that from?
Everything that
Like,
you have said.
I'm always amazed at how you always like take in all sorts of things that you've heard over your lifetime, and then you just take them, you
This is
package them
just
all
the
in,
stuff I've
and then
heard
you
over the
put it,
last 40
and then you
minutes.
put it on someone's back and say that's what you're saying. Like, that's just stuff that you've heard all through your life. What I'm saying is simple, okay? Please try and follow. I'm saying this. If Imagine yourself standing on a square, all right? Belief in God is square one. Uh, Worshiping God is square two. Living your life eternally in bliss is step three, right? Now, let's say you're in step zero. You say there's no God, there's no, if he exists, is not good, right? Let's say you move to step one. Now you're like, now you know that God exists. If you're in step zero or in step one, but okay, you're in step one, but you don't want anything to do with God. And when I say God, I'm talking about the Christian God. I'm not talking about Krishna or Allah or whatever. I'm saying it doesn't benefit you in the long run to say, okay, I know God exists. It actually makes it worse for you when you say, I know God exists, but I still want nothing to do with him. That's a lot worse than for someone who says, like, who's like honest and says, the 15% who says, if God exists, then that changes everything about life. My life would look very different if I found out that God is real. That's the 15% that perhaps is worth appealing to. I don't know, 85% until a huge mindset shift occurs and someone uh, realizes that we're not just talking about debating God like he was just another person on the street, but we're talking about everything that your life consists of. And that's why these talks are so passionate, because like the resistance for you to have your entire life flipped around, for you having to not have to do certain things, say certain things, act a certain way, that's gonna that's gonna incite passion in a person. And if belief in God, if the reality of God being real does not change, doesn't even change it even a little bit in terms of how you act in your life, then it's not beneficial to you. It's actually going to be worse for you,
Yeah,
because now you're under more condemnation.
I don't relate to a single word of that. None of it makes sense to me. It sounds nonsensical. So you
And it
lost
should, like,
me.
of course it should.
You lost me at square one, you see. Your square made sense all the way up to square one. Now I believe that a God exists.
Then nothing has changed.
But you're not going to even do anything. You're not going to allow me to take a normal human path to get
No,
from square one to square two.
I want you to believe in God.
No, no,
I
no.
want that
Hang
for you.
on, hang on.
But you're
Hang
saying,
on. If you please, I'm commenting on your squares and where it goes wrong. In square one, I come to a belief that a God exists. But square two is worshiping the God. And I am saying that there is a chasm, a gap between knowing that a God exists, even a specific God, and getting to the place of worship, because there is a lot of there's a human path that we take from knowing that a king exists to freely being a citizen under that king's rule. There's a path that we take, and it is not merely that France has a king, therefore I'll move to France and he'll be my king. No, we've got to take a path, a journey from square one to square two, and you're requiring a prior commitment
no,
that if
I am
God
not. I'm
exists, hang
saying,
on, this is how I'm hearing it though, and I think it's how 99.9% of everyone else
you
is
don't
hearing it
know that.
too.
That's not
You
true.
you can't even attempt to get to square two unless you make a prior commitment to square two before you can get to square one. Because if God doesn't think that you'll worship him, then he doesn't have any point of you getting to know him. And
No,
what I'm saying is that
I'm
is a
not.
completely backward thing. And I will never get to know God then if it means that I've got to make a prior commitment before even knowing he exists that I would worship him if he is real.
I'm amazed at how you're misrepresenting what I'm saying. So like this is just, to me, this is amazingly baffling because what I'm saying is not, I'm not saying, I haven't said anything about prior commitment. I haven't even used that word. That's not a word that I use. What I've said is this: if you say, if if you say knowing God won't change anything about my life, then it's you who has made that commitment already. So if you're against prior commitments, since you're the one who introduced that word, then it's you who said, I don't even like like it doesn't matter. It's just another natural thing in the world, in the
I
universe.
didn't say that it wouldn't change anything about my life. I said that it wouldn't cause me to worship him simply because I knew he existed.
But your life would look the same way it does, right?
I have no idea how my life would look. I haven't met him. You're not giving me the chance to meet him.
What I was doing once you pause this video, when I was bringing up that poll, my point was to point out that there are people, doesn't even, I didn't even say it was you. I don't know why you took so much offense to it. What I'm saying is that there are some people who say, even if they found out without a shadow of a doubt that God exists, then that will not change anything about their life. They will not worshiping. That's what
They
worshiping
would
God
not
entails.
worship him. And I'm saying that that is a correct position to take.
It's not a correct position, or it's a position, it's asking
What
people
you were
what they would
saying,
do. So it can't
that's
be
right. And
that you're
what
deciding
you were
what's true
saying
or
is
not for other
unless they
people.
answer that they would worship him, then they don't get to know he exists.
That's not what I said. Where did I say that? I never said they
In
don't get to know. I'm saying that if they get to know him, then and they stay in that same position, then they're worse off than when they were just atheists who
I
said,
don't believe that they're worse off. I
no,
think
they are worse off because
that is a prior commitment from
they
you that they're worse
know
off.
now without a shadow of a doubt. They know that,
Great.
and they're still resistant to it,
Right, but once we
to
learn that
knowing him even.
hang on, once we learn that a God exists, we then have the opportunity to make
Judge
decisions
him.
about what we do with that information. Yes, we judge him. Of
That's
course,
the
we have to
folly of
judge
it.
him. We have to look, if you think that God is good, that's because you've judged him to be good. Of course, we judge him. We have to judge him. I have to judge people in my life to know whether they're psychopaths or not. Right? Because I'm not going to fill my life with psychopaths. So of course
Amazing.
there's some degree of judgment that we have to make once we get to know a person. It's part of getting to know them. Is this a good person? Is this a bad person? Is this someone I want to spend time with? Is this an amazing person that I want to be like? We have to ascertain those things. That doesn't come with just the knowledge of knowing they exist.
You're the one who's separating things. You're like,
Well, they have to. They're naturally separated.
No, no. I reject that idea that someone can say, well, you know what? I really, really wish God would prove that he's real to me. And then on the tail end of things in their heart, they're saying, well, I'm still going to ask him if he's okay with my lifestyle of doing whatever I want to do. Because either way, one of you has to budge. It's not like you're going to judge God. And are you going to convince God that whatever it is that you're doing in your life, like how does this conversation play out? You're going to tell God, this is why I think
Yeah,
I'm more moral.
I think it would be a valid question if a God suddenly showed up and you have a conversation opportunity to figure out who he is and whether you're going to worship him or not, is to say, what are your thoughts on homosexuality? I don't think
so
that's
you're judging the God, so that it becomes just another compatriot, right? Another companion to you, right? He has to affirm your lifestyle. It's not the other way around.
One of the possibilities.
right?
Hang on, wrong. One of the possibilities of this God is that this is such an amazing being that I want to be like this person, that I want to learn from this person, that I want to do the things that this person does, that their opinion is really good and it matters, and I want to make that a part of my life. This is true of people that I know.
Right. But
Okay,
you're
so
saying, if you'd ask them, what do you think about homosexuality? And if they say, you know what, I don't think I support it, you'd be like, what would you say? You'd be like, well, you're a bigot, right? Is that what you'd say?
I might, but that would be my prerogative to make. Or I might say, "Oh, well, tell me more." Or I might, you see
Right.
that
So then
I
right there,
seriously,
okay.
hang
So
on,
then
I
you get
seriously
it then.
doubt.
So then why are you getting so upset about me saying that there are people who say like they won't do that? Like, why are you getting so hot about that?
But I wouldn't worship him either just because he existed. That's what I am telling you. There is a
And I'm
place
not
between
saying,
step 1 and step 2 in your square that you are not recognizing. And you think that someone is doing something wrong or that they
well,
are
for me,
defying
God
belief.
appearing and making himself known to a person isn't just like, oh, here I am. That's it. It comes with a lot of other things. That's why I'm a Christian.
Okay,
It's
then
not just
I don't know
it,
what's underneath all of your assumptions here.
well, that's shocking because I assumed that you did. I assumed you understood what Christian theology taught about conversion. It's not just knowing, oh, I know God exists, because you know about that verse in James that says even the demons know that God exists and they shudder, right? You've heard of that. And that's not the kind of faith or belief that the Bible is trying to get into people's minds and hearts. It's not, oh, wow, God exists. Because that kind of faith will still send you to hell if it doesn't come along with the fruit of the Holy Spirit, doesn't come along with true, genuine affection for God and who
Have
He is
you
and what He has done. But
I
you're
know that
saying, I
you're going
just
to see
want,
this
it's a
as
step. It's
you're going
like
to
a
see this as a
logical,
bit of a tangent. And
naturalistic
I'm not trying to make this a
ladder.
tangent, but why would the demons who know God exists and who have been in his presence not want to follow him? Whatever
Because you're
the
being
answer,
illogical.
hey, whatever the answer to that question is, at least they got to choose not to follow him.
They are in more danger, in more trouble.
I would rather be in more danger.
Wow.
Well, you're saying that I'm going to go to hell anyway. So I
That's
don't
great.
say I
I'm
would
not,
be in more danger. I would
no, I'm saying,
rather be in more danger, take the hotter part of hell by knowing God and rejecting him than to not know he was there at all. Because that is to give me no choice.
that's not true. You don't, you have a choice. You have a choice.
What? Because it's in scripture?
No, that's
Okay,
not the only
then
reason.
I don't know what the choice is, because the choice then, if I
Because
don't know
you
he's
just said
there,
it yourself. Like, those are damning words. You're just saying that I'd rather be now more damned
if the
Like,
choice is I have to
really?
make a prior commitment before knowing God, that's not a choice.
Not a
So
prior commitment.
let me know the
It's an
God like the
introspection.
demons do. Let me at least have
That's
that
not
much knowledge.
enviable. No, you don't want to have that kind of
Don't tell
knowledge
me
and
what I don't
still
want.
no,
You don't
but
get to tell me what I don't
yeah,
want.
no, I'm not saying I'm not putting sanctions. I'm speaking generalistically to whoever's listening as an argument, saying you don't want to be that person who says, I want to be like the demons. That's not a sentence that should be coming out of anyone's mouth. The demons are where they are because they know
We
who
don't
God
know
is
why the
and
demons
they
we
chose
don't know why the demons rejected God. Maybe they know something
does it
about God
matter?
that the rest of us should know.
Like what?
Like he's a jackass. I have no
Like
idea.
how does that make sense when the demons are the ones who are co-opting and bringing in all the suffering in this world?
And you learned that because you read God's book.
So your stance is to take the side of the demons instead of taking
No,
God's side.
my stance is even taking the book that you would consider God's book and recognizing that there are people who were as close to God physically and spiritually and creationally as possible, and they still chose not to be around him. Now
And I'm saying they're worse off.
that tells me that there has to be some kind of reason behind that. Either that or God created some stupid fool creatures.
So, but so you just made an argument against yourself, right? You
Did
say
I?
if stupid little creatures, like yeah, a creature who would know, be in God's presence and still rebel. You're saying you would be in God's presence and you'd still want to know, you'd still want to compare the notes and be like, what
Yeah,
do you think
because
about this
apparently
creature?
not everyone who's been in God's presence is all that impressed.
But you're saying it's a logic for the demons. It's they're stupid, but for you it wouldn't be,
No,
right?
I'm not. I'm look. I'm saying either God created some brain broke creatures, or the creatures had a good reason for not wanting to be around
Then
God.
you didn't say good reason. You said reason. Now it's a good reason. Like what good reason could there be to rebel against God? What's
Because
the good
God
reason?
might be the evil guy. He may be the bad guy.
So here you are then. You're taking the side of the demons.
I am not. I am taking the
Yes,
side of
you're
the
saying like
fact,
maybe like make taking the side of the fact. It's like if you see
just
someone,
saying that there
let's
might be
say
a good
you see
reason
someone
why
getting
the demons
arrested
rebelled
at
is taking their
7-Eleven.
side.
You see someone getting arrested at 7-Eleven,
So
and this person, like the police are being extra handsy with this person, and you go up to the police officer and you say, you can't do that. Maybe that person really wanted to do something good.
you're not
And
making any
that's a good
sense.
reason. No, I'm making perfect
You're
sense
not
because
making any sense.
it attacks your statement right
Okay,
at the
why
root.
you tell me
You're
then
saying
from your
you are
perspective,
more comfortable. That's why I see it
from
even
your
on
Christian
the I
perspective,
see it
why
on
did
the
the demons
blogs.
rebel?
I see it on, I'm going to answer that, but I see
Okay,
it on the blogs. You capitalize Satan. You put capital S Satan, capital S Satan. When you're talking about God, small g, small g, small g.
wrong.
I don't know if you do this. I don't know if
Satan
you're
is a
doing this
proper. Hang on,
intentionally.
not
No,
fair. Let's talk literature if you like. Satan is a
you
proper
don't.
name.
Same.
Satan,
It. No,
stop
it's not.
it.
Same
Stop.
with God. God is always capitalized.
No, stop.
In, the H
Stop.
in God in
Stop.
classical English.
Learn
No,
something about someone
God
who knows
is.
what he's talking about.
You don't know what you're
Okay,
talking about.
I do.
English,
Satan
proper
is a proper
English.
name. Devil is not a proper name. You'll never see me capitalize devil unless it's the beginning of the sentence.
And you never
God,
capitalize God
devil, not capitalized. Satan,
because
Jehovah, capitalized. You
you
see the
never
difference,
use
right, Timmy?
Jehovah. You're talking out of you don't know what you're saying. You're like every time I see it, I'm like, you're just like you're willfully, even if it's not consciously, it's subconsciously. Capital S Satan. It's not even a proper name. It's not. Even in the Bible, it's not it's not a proper name. But subconsciously, like you're taking like this is what the guy's talking about, resistance to belief. You're siding, you're playing devil's advocate, literally. That's the disposition you're in. And until that disposition is switched and flipped and
Right.
taken away and
You're
eradicated.
just wrong. And the fact that
No,
you
no,
capitalize
no, it's not. I'm
God
not wrong.
and he and
No,
his
no, because
um
that's first of all,
that's just you being
grammatically
religious.
correct.
It's not you being literally correct.
It's a
You're just
rule
wrong
in
on the
English.
facts.
Look it up. You don't know this. I'll even post it in the forum. You
Feel
don't know
free.
this because you are so steeped in rebellion against God that you will capitalize Satan and you'll go out of your way, even when it doesn't make sense, to put small g. That's
Look,
one way.
Satan means accuser in Greek, if I'm or in Hebrew, if I'm not mistaken. But David means beloved one. All names come from words with meanings. That doesn't mean they're not proper names. David is capitalized every time. Man is not capitalized. Satan is his name. Devil is his characterization, his ontology, if you will.
Not his name.
And that is why I don't capitalize devil and why I do capitalize Satan. And when I say Jehovah, I capitalize Jehovah,
How often
but
do
I
you
do
say
not
Jehovah?
capitalize God. Tell me you see the difference there.
You don't do it. You don't do it. And even then,
I do every time, every single
you're
time.
abusing principles of grammar, but you don't care about that, clearly, right? But the
Yeah, I
point is
am
this.
using
The
principles
point is
of
this.
grammar because the written
You
word
will
is
play
grammar.
devil's advocate. Like you made a self-defeating argument just a few minutes ago. You're like, what kind of stupid creature rebels against God? Right?
Well, what I'm asking is what kind of creature did God create? So
And you said you
if in
must have been
fact
a
the
really
demons
stupid
are just
creature.
too stupid to understand God's greatness, that's God's fault because he created them that way.
No,
And
that's not how it
so
works.
otherwise, then it's fair to ask why they would
Not how it works.
rebel.
Why is that fair? Even if you knew the reason, like would the reason
Well,
like
even
whatever
rebellions
the
on earth,
reason is,
it's fair to ask about any rebellion that we want to know
okay,
about. Why did Americans
here's the
rebel?
self rule, right? Right? Self rule, independence from God. How has that worked out for human beings?
Well, I don't know. I guess it depends on the
You
rule,
don't
the
know.
kind of rule that they were under. So, we
You
can
don't
ask why Americans rebelled from Britain. And you could come up with all kinds of reasons, and I'm sure that you would come up with, some really good reasons. You would think there were really good reasons for
It
why we
doesn't, it's not
rebelled.
even the same situation here. We're
Well, I
talking
know.
about
I think it's even harder to understand
rebelling.
why angels of God would rebel
Yeah,
when
it's
they're
hard
in
for
the
it's a stupid decision, like you just said before. I don't know
how
why
d
you're going
well,
away
I'm
from
not
that.
look, I didn't say it
It
was a
doesn't
stupid
matter if they
decision.
think they had a good reason, whatever that reason is. It doesn't matter. It's a stupid decision to make.
Well, but you
If
don't
it gets
how
you thrown out from paradise, it's a stupid
well, it
decision
obviously
to make.
wasn't paradise.
No,
If
that
it
doesn't make sense.
it does. If
It
it was
was
paradise, they
paradise
wouldn't have
and they
rebelled.
rebelled. And
Well,
they rebelled.
it was
If they
by
were in
what definition
paradise,
was it paradise?
no. What are you
People
talking
don't
about?
rebel from
It's like
paradise.
if I take you and I put you in a mansion that's worth $10 million and you go around, it's a paradise, and you go around starting breaking the stuff there, the furniture, and coloring on the walls. And I come back and I say, what's going on? Why do you do this? And you say this place was not a paradise. How does that make sense? Tell me.
Maybe it was a paradise by your definition, but not mine.
What?
Right. You put me in a place that you thought was going to be
No,
great.
I put you in a place where you say
Okay.
this place is awesome.
So it's objectively paradise now.
No, well, as far as we're both
If I want to
concerned,
be
you're not.
somewhere else,
You're
it's
just
obviously not paradise to me.
wait.
So,
So, how long do we have to put you in some place before you wreck it? Like, it doesn't make sense. Okay, let's say
I don't know. Do I have, for instance, in this paradise, the freedom to arrange the furniture the way I want, or can I not touch it? Do I have the freedom to use something other than the fine china, or do I have to use that all the time? Do I have the freedom to leave and come back when I want to? Do I have the freedom to bring guests when I want to? There are all kinds of
if
ways where this
I s-
becomes not a
no,
paradise.
no, you're just going by the definition of things that you don't like. I'm saying we put you in a place that you like, and you're like,
you
okay, that's great,
locked
that's
me in a
great, that's
gilded
great.
cage,
You will,
a prison,
it's not a
a
paradise is not a
with pretty
cage.
bars.
You're just now you're trivializing it because you don't want the main point to come through. The main point,
Your main
you
point
don't
is
want the main point. You're
incoherent.
making it a funny thing. It's a punchline, but it's like you're getting away from the thing that's gonna
If
topple the
if the
domino.
angels were in paradise, they'd still be there.
It's
If it
not
was if it was paradise for
It's
them,
not
they would
if
still be
they
there.
were. There's no if they were in paradise. They
Okay,
rebelled,
so
and
why?
we're talking
Who
about.
rebels against
Hey,
paradise?
It does, like, yes, who does that in the same way? Who, when in the
So you
presence
have
of
to
God,
have it.
says, I
Either
wanna know
you
what you
either
think
have to
about
say
LGBT.
they are so
You're gonna ask
illogical
God
that
about
there's no
LGBT
sense to
questions.
their actions whatsoever, or you have to consider that there's a possibility that there was some good reason why they did it.
Listen,
And what you were
listen,
saying is
there
you don't
can
even get to ask the
never,
question.
there can never be a good. It's like if I give you $100 million and I
There
say,
can be
here
no
you
good
go.
reason
Wait,
for those
can
slaves
I
to try to
finish?
get their
Can I
freedom.
finish? Can I finish? I give you $100 million, and then you take the $100 million and you flush it down the toilet, you set it on fire. And I'm like, why'd you do that for? When you say, well, I had a good reason for it. There can never be a good
Yes, there
reason.
can be a good reason for that, because
Tell me, please,
maybe
tell
I'm
me, because you're
okay.
gonna crack the code. Yeah.
You want me to tell you?
Tell me the real reason why, in the presence of
One possibility why I might flush your $100 million is because you have had me locked in the basement forever, and what I want is not money, but friends. Your money doesn't mean anything to me. What I want
well, I was
is
asking
human
about the angels,
companionship.
but I'm talking about human
Okay, well,
companionship.
you just
Well,
asked me
how
why.
does
Give me you a
how
reason why I
does
would flush
rebelling
$100
get
million. That might be a
flush it
reason.
because you don't? Okay, one reason is you don't want it. Okay, but the thing is that you're in a situation where you're able to have happiness and joy and bliss, and you're saying, then it wasn't because they rebelled. So you're looking at the action and you're taking the action to determine the location. That's not how it works. That's not how it works.
Well, okay.
If I
You're
put you in a
saying that
nice
the
place,
angels were happy, but they rebelled anyway.
I don't know why they did it.
Don't you
No one
care?
does. Why would I? If it's a stupid decision, you
How
said
do
it
you know
yourself.
it's a stupid decision? That's what I mean. You don't even
You
care.
said it yourself. Okay, it's very simple. God is all knowing. God is all, like, all these things, all these omni attributes, right? Puts you in a paradise. You have everything you ever need, but you decide, I don't want this anymore. I can do better. I want to go off on my own. That's a stupid
If I
decision because
decide,
you're
hang on,
going
if I
against.
decide that this is not what I want and I want to do something different, then it wasn't a paradise for me.
That's no.
That was his
That's wrong.
definition of a paradise. It
No,
wasn't
that's wrong.
mine.
No, that's wrong. And it's that kind of thinking specifically
Do you,
that sets you up in this situation where you're saying you want God to exist. And then it's like you're gonna start an inquisition. And what do you think about this? Why did you let this
strangely,
happen?
I am really, really curious to see what Dale would say. I wish, Dale, look, I know you listen to these shows sometimes. Just send me a private email.
Why would it matter what Dale
Chloe
says?
and Mac and I find his mind interesting, and I have no idea what he would think.
No,
And
because
I value
you're
some of his opinions, and I would be really curious to know what
what?
he would think. And so,
So again, the conversation,
honestly, if I could hear
when
from Dale or William Lane Craig on this conversation, I would rather hear from Dale.
so you're so it's like it's contradictory time, man. It's like trivializing time, contradictory time, where it's like, okay, let's get into the real hot button topics, and then it's like, okay, let's joke about it a little bit. Like we were right at the pulse of the issue.
Well, okay, I
Now
don't
let's
I
maybe you like Molinism better, but like Molinism doesn't give you the satisfaction of the answers that, like, it just says like
I
God
assure you, I
did
don't like
that.
Molinism better.
But that's what you just said. I wish I could hear from William Lane Craig about this. Like, he has
No.
a video out. You can watch it.
No, I said I would, given the choice between William Lane Craig and Dale, I would rather hear what Dale thinks about this conversation than William
He's
Lane
gonna
Craig.
say what William Lane Craig said.
No,
Because
I don't think so.
you don't
he doesn't agree with William Lane Craig on everything. But anyway, Dale, shout out. I I'm still here and I hope you're doing well. Let's chat. So yeah, I think the whole your whole idea is that you have accepted the whole story about God. It's just this is
And
it's
you
not
rejected it.
well, let me let me just say you accepted all of the story, this entire container, which defines your God, top to bottom. And you think that if someone does not is not willing to accept all of that, then they are somehow not open to knowing God, or that
That's not what I said.
there's no reason to for God to ever get to know someone who doesn't accept the whole bucket.
That's not what I
That
said.
is
That's not
that
even
is
how I
God.
believe salvation works. It doesn't work like that at all. It doesn't work like someone decides, okay, have decided I'm gonna know God, and then
I know that
they work
that's
their
not
way up the ladder.
right.
They work.
I know that you don't
You
think
don't
that's how
know that.
salvation
No,
works, but
no,
it's
you don't know that.
I don't.
Actually, you don't
Okay.
know that because you're just characterizing it, mischaracterizing it.
Well, you've been saying the whole time that God has no reason
I never said that.
to what? That God
I
has
never
no
said God has.
reason
I
to
never
make
said God
himself
has
known to
no
you
reason. I never said God has
if
no
you're not
reason.
going to accept him and worship him.
No, I raised the question. I raised the question. What advantage? Listen to what I'm saying. I raised the question. What advantage would you have to have uh the current knowledge you have or lack of knowledge of God versus the demon knowledge, right? They know God, but they just don't. They can't. They don't believe. They don't have faith. They don't want to. They don't want to be in subjection to him. They're to follow the devil. What advantage is there? And you said, well, I'd rather be with the demons, and I asked you why. I don't remember what you said. Like, did you give a reason?
I didn't say I'd rather be with the demons. I said I'd rather have the demons deal to know God and choose to reject him or not, but
And what's
not have
the
a chance to know
advantage?
him at all.
What's the advantage of that?
The advantage is that I get to make a choice about whether I want to follow this God or not.
So it's all about your choice. Like, this is my choice. I made the choice. I made the decision. But
Yes,
right now you feel like you have no choice. Like zero, like
right. I
you're
have
just
zero
a
choice.
robot.
I have
Like a
zero
robot,
choice
you've
to
been programmed
I
to
have
say
zero
no.
choice to follow a God who does not make it known that he exists. That's not a choice.
But then when you're on in the demon side of things, you're like, maybe there's a good reason that they said no. Maybe it
Yes,
wasn't paradise.
because the demons they were there. You weren't there. They were
It was
there.
there. Even if they were there for a million years and they rebelled on year million one January 1st, they made a mistake. They know that. It's not
Where does it say they know that?
no.
Where
What do you mean? Do they say
I,
they wait? Do you think that the demons are rejoicing that they get to be damned eternally?
not necessarily, but if I
Not
follow your reasoning, I
necessarily.
will be damned eternally whether I want to worship him or not.
No, but your situation is different because like
Why?
this is why we're probing the situation, right? We're like, okay, what's wrong? What's going on here? And when we probe for that situation, instead of you saying, like what if I was in heaven, then there would be no good reason to rebel because I'm in the presence of God, I'm in the presence of all this bliss and goodness and everything. Instead of you saying that, you're saying the opposite. You're saying what the demons said. They're saying, "Oh, maybe I want to have, maybe I want to have more LGBT
No,
in my paradise.
I'm
Maybe I want to have
acknowledging
this."
I'm acknowledging the
That's what
story. I'm
you're
acknowledging the story that the people
but
that God
you're
made
saying they had a
first
good reason.
and
They did
surrounded
not have a
himself
good
with chose to be elsewhere. That's the story, right?
story is about. Even if you throw away the story, right? And you put yourself in that context as a thought experiment, you're in paradise. There's a God there. Everything is great. You've been there for who knows how many eons. And then one day, if there are even days there, you decide, I'm going to try and change things up. Whatever reason you have, even if you think it's the best reason ever, it still pales in comparison. Like it's always
But shouldn't that be my choice?
Wait, let me finish. Qualitatively, compared to what you've known, you've experienced your entire life, qualitatively, that choice is going to be inferior. Like the first time a child lies to their parents, that choice qualitatively, no matter what reason they have, whether they think their mommy is going to hate them or is going to take away the PlayStation, whatever reason they have, it may be a good reason in their mind, but whatever reason they give, it's always going to be a bad reason 100% of the time. It's not if, it's always going to be a bad
I
reason.
very much disagree with that. There are really good reasons why children should lie to their parents. Not will, should. They should lie. I can give you
Therein
many
lies the
situations
difference.
why children should lie to their parents, depending on the kind of parents they have.
Why do you add the qualifier depending on the? Why shouldn't it be children should just lie to their parents all the time if they feel like it?
Well, because
Why do you
everything
have
is
to add that qualifier?
everything is qualified. Everything has a qualifier. So, for instance, if a child knows that telling the truth about, eating the cookie before dinner will get him viciously beaten by a drunken parent, he should lie. He should lie about eating the cookie. Absolutely should lie. Should do it every time.
Always
Maybe
with the
shouldn't eat the
extremes.
cookie, but absolutely should lie about it.
Always with the extremes. How many?
Well, that's why we have to
How many
qualify it,
scenarios?
isn't it?
It's like you have to like everything. There's no such thing as okay. You can't say okay, lying is wrong. You can't say that. That was like you should.
Lying is
Every
not
single
wrong.
thing about
No, I don't
lying is
believe that.
not
I don't know. It's
lying
not.
to the
I don't believe
government,
it's wrong.
lying to the police. Lying is not wrong. Lying,
It is
it's
not.
all-
No, it's not. No,
So you could be lying to me right now, right?
It is childlike to believe that telling the truth is always right and telling a lie is always wrong. That's simply not how the universe works. Lying is not
How
wrong.
would you know that? How do you know you're not wrong right now?
I don't know.
Right. So then you can't say stuff like that. You
Okay.
can't say you can't say it's
You were
the rule of
starting
the
to sound a
universe.
lot like John Lennox, and let that be a segue into.
It's the rule
Kelsey,
of the
I'm going to do it.
universe. How much of the universe do you really know? Like how much about the universe do you know?
Let's let John Lennox say some,
Unbelievable.
let's let John Lennox say some stupid things for a while. Okay. So and honestly, as painful as this conversation has been, is less painful than listening to John Lennox. But here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe in God. I believe in the supernatural God who created the heavens and the earth. I believe in a God who holds the heavens and the earth in existence. I believe that on the basis of rational evidence, similar to the beliefs held by the founders of this house, who gave this university the motto Dominus Illuminatio Mea. They saw no contradiction between faith in God and the utmost excellence in rational inquiry. And if I dare mention my alma mater of Cambridge in this holy place, I would remind you that on the door of the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge are written the words, "Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them." And as we look at the rise of science in the 16th and 17th centuries, Alfred North Whitehead and many others commented that men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not ashamed of being both a scientist and a Christian, because arguably Christianity gave me my subject. What I am amazed at is that serious thinkers today continue to ask us to choose between God and science. That's like asking people to choose between Henry Ford and engineering as an explanation of the motor car. When Newton discovered his law of gravity, he didn't say, I've got a law, I don't need God. No, he wrote the Principia Mathematica, arguably the greatest work in the whole history of science, because he saw that God is not the same kind of explanation as a scientific explanation. God doesn't compete. Agency does not compete with mechanism and law. Why is there something rather than nothing? Alan Sandage, the brilliant cosmologist who became a Christian in his 50s, said God is the answer to that question. But people are now so desperate to show that the universe created itself from nothing, which seems to me to be an immediate oxymoron. If I say X created Y, I'm assuming the existence of X to explain the existence of Y. If I say X created X, I'm assuming the existence of X to explain the existence of X, which simply shows that nonsense remains nonsense even if high-powered scientists utter it. It reminds me a little bit of G.K. Chesterton, who said, "It is absurd to complain that it is unthinkable for an unthinkable God to make everything out of nothing, and then to pretend that it is more thinkable that nothing should turn itself into everything." The heavens declare the glory of God, says the ancient psalm. And we've unraveled a bit of that, seeing the fine-tuning of the fundamental forces of nature. It's something that's so striking to scientists that it demands explanation. And it seems to me that Arno Penzias hit it right. He is the Nobel Prize winner who discovered the microwave background on which a lot of the evidence for the Big Bang is based. He said astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. But I want to come to what I think is one of the fundamental arguments for theism. I take it this house believes in reason. That's why we're all here. And as a scientist, I believe that the universe is rationally intelligible. That is something that has struck some of the geniuses of science as demanding an explanation. Einstein said the only incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. And Wigner talked about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. How is it that a mathematician thinking in her head in here can come up with equations that seem to fit the universe out there? Well, how is it indeed? Because the irony of the atheist position here is evident. My atheist friends, and I have many of them, tell me that the driving force of evolution, which eventually produced our human cognitive faculties, reason included, was not primarily concerned with truth at all, but with survival. And we all know, ladies and gentlemen, what has often happened and still happens to truth when individuals or commercial enterprises or nations feel themselves threatened and struggle for survival. A leading philosopher, Alvin Plantinga of Notre Dame, says if atheists are right that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then they have given us strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties, and therefore inevitably
I'm sorry, were you saying something?
Nope.
Okay, sorry.
to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including their atheism. Their biology and their belief in naturalism would therefore appear to be at war with each other in a conflict that has nothing at all to do with God. Yet my atheist friends still insist that it is rational for them to believe that the evolution of human reason was not directed for the purpose of discovering truth. And yet it is irrational for me to believe that human reason was designed and created by God to enable us to understand and believe the truth. Curious logic. By contrast with that, biblical theism asserts that ultimate reality is personal and intelligent, and the reason science works, and this was the motivating force that drove the great pioneers of science, is that the universe out there and the human mind in here that does the science are ultimately the product of the same intelligent divine mind. Human beings are made, we are told, in God's image. And that means that science can be done. That makes infinitely more sense to me as a scientist than atheism does. Now let me come briefly to ethics. Ethical behavior, like rational behavior, of course, does not itself require religious belief. This is consistent with the fact that humans are created in God's image as rational moral persons. But just as I suggest that rationality cannot be explained without the existence of God, so I dare to suggest that the existence of morality cannot be explained either. As modern science sprang from Judeo-Christian sources, so did the concept of human equality. Listen to atheist Jürgen Habermas, arguably one of Germany's leading intellectuals. He said that universalistic egalitarianism, from which sprang the ideals of freedom and a collective life and solidarity, the individual morality of conscience, human rights and democracy, is the direct legacy of the Judaic ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love. This legacy, substantially unchanged, has been the object of continual critical appropriation and reinterpretation. To this day, there's no alternative to it. Everything else is just idle postmodern talk. And it seems to me he's hitting the core of something important, because the value of a human being on which such egalitarianism rests is based not on what the human being can do, but what she's made of, or how she's made in God's image. I never forget speaking on one of my many visits to Russia to a colleague in the Academy of Sciences. And he said, "You know, John, we thought we could abolish God and retain a value for human beings. We found we couldn't, and we murdered millions of them." And Alexander Solzhenitsyn has said, "If I'm asked, why is it that 60 million of my fellow countrymen were sacrificed?" He said, the answer is, we have forgotten God. Science, of course, marvelous as it is limited. Even a Nobel Prize winner, by analyzing a cake, cannot tell why it was made. But Aunt Matilda, who made it, can tell you. She can reveal it to you. But if she doesn't reveal it to you, you'll never know. And that brings me to my next evidence. It's the same with the universe. We can analyze it magnificently, but ultimately, if it has a maker, and I believe it has, only he can tell us what it's all about. And he's done so in the powerful narrative of the Bible, in particular in its analysis of the problem with humanity, not simply in terms of behavioral breakdown between people, but a vertical breakdown of trust between us and the Creator. The unique solution to that problem is not simply in terms of human ethical development, although that's very important, but in terms of something far deeper altogether. The restoration of the fractured relationship with God through the salvation he has brought through Jesus Christ. A radical relationship that empowers us to live ethically from God. And here we reach what for me is the chief evidence, not only for the existence but the nature of God. It is Jesus Christ. He it was who not only taught the golden rule but embodied it, fed the hungry, healed the sick and suffering, and welcomed society's outcasts, brought honor and respect to the marginalized and ashamed. And he's brought forgiveness and peace to multi-millions around the world. He's able to do this, of course, because though he was a man, he uniquely never was only a man.
Okay, so I'm going to use another one of my stoppages here. Not because of anything particular John Lennox said. He can blather on whatever, but it's just a tiny point I remember making a note of when I first listened to this video. Jesus fed the hungry. And I would ask, when did Jesus ever feed the hungry? If the answer is, oh, don't you remember the 4,000, the 5,000? I would say then that is just evidence that he never fed the hungry in the way that we're talking about the hungry. Never did it, never helped the poor. When did he help the poor? Well, he helped, he healed some people who were beggars, which is not exactly the same as what anyone means when they mean help the poor. So we attribute these things to Jesus and his ministry, despite the fact that these things simply never happened. We're reading back into his ministry things that we think are good things for us today. We didn't get that out of any example from Jesus. That's the only point that I wanted to make there. But since we have a stoppage, feel free to tell me why you think I'm wrong about that.
Well, you're saying that because wait, you're saying because you don't believe that he supernaturally could multiply the loaves, then that means it never happened,
No,
right? That
I'm not saying that it never happened. In fact, I'm giving the story all of its credit and saying that happened.
okay.
That's simply not an example of feeding the hungry as we mean by feeding the hungry. Those were just people who were at a fellowship meeting that went too long and they didn't bring any food. So
Well,
that would
okay.
be kind of like your
Well,
church
you're
having a
still wrong.
potluck saying, "Oh, we fed the hungry."
You're still wrong because um in John it talks about how like when he was talking about Judas having charge of the money bag, and the disciples like they talk to themselves, they wonder like, oh, what did Jesus tell him? And some of them were like, maybe he told him to go give money to the poor or something. Implied in that is that this is something that they used to do. They used to collect money, whatever they would get it, and then they'll go out and give it to the poor.
Yeah, I'm not
So you're
familiar with
wrong
that.
there.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, so take a moment and find that and read it for me.
Okay.
This could be the one thing I learned today. And
Uh,
by the way, even if that conversation happened, I don't think that that would be
well,
implicit
nothing
that
can
that's
convince
something
you
different.
then. It's like, okay, it's like, oh, even if it's there, then it doesn't mean it happened. Then you'd literally have to have been there, right?
Even if
Uh,
you find the thing that you categorized as that, that doesn't mean that Jesus had some kind of ministry of feeding the poor. But by all means, let's see the passage you're talking about.
okay. So the first one is in John chapter 12. Um, yeah, 12 when the anointing happens at Bethany. Okay. Verse 4. Okay. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he was about to betray him, said, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. So
That
him
doesn't say what you
asking,
suggested. I'm familiar with that
well,
passage.
that's one. There's another one. Like, hold on, just
Okay.
calm down, okay?
Well,
Um,
look, I'm giving you plenty of space to.
no, you're not. You're interrupting. Like,
You read a
you've been
passage. I
so
just pointed out that
interrupting.
that's not what you
Well, I'm saying like,
suggested.
okay, him saying, "Oh, this could have been given to the poor."
Right.
Um,
That doesn't imply that they had a ministry of giving money to the poor. That's just some one who's sanctimoniously saying, "Oh, this woman's wasting all of this money on anointing, uh, this man's feet when that money could have gone to better use." Which, by the way,
oh,
I agree with the sentiment, but that's not what
wow.
you were saying.
Well, I was saying that okay, him saying that implies like it's not like one to one, but it implies that that's
Okay,
something they did. Okay, this
is
is
there
the
a
one I was.
passage
Yeah,
that does it
here it
does say
is.
what you're
Like,
okay?
are you patient enough to wait like 2 seconds? Here it is, John 13, verse 17. Wait, no. Uh, yeah, I just had it.
No,
Okay.
John 13 is way too early for that, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, 13, verse 29.
Okay.
Some thought that because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, buy what we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor.
Can you give me a little bit more context around that?
All right, so the context is they're about to have the Last Supper, and they're all seated there, and Jesus has just finished washing their feet, and then Judas, like they're taking turns dipping their loaves into the dish, and
Hmm.
then Simon uh is like Judas is like, okay, gotta wait for that to go.
Jesus talks to Simon, not Simon, but Judas, and says, "What you're going to do quickly." And then he rises up and goes off. And then the rest of the disciples are like, "Oh, maybe he just told him to go buy something or give something to the poor." Like, why would they think, like, they'd already spent a couple of Passovers with Jesus? So this shows that this is something that they were accustomed to.
Yeah, I don't see the connection.
Are you looking at the text itself?
No,
or-
I'm just listening to you to you categorize
Well,
it and read it.
here it is. The connection, like, okay, Judas had the money bag, right? There was someone had to keep the wallet, right? And ever so often they would be like, "Hey, Judas, we need to buy lunch for everyone. Can you go buy lunch for everyone?" Or something like that. Like that happens earlier on in John, when Jesus is talking to the woman at the well. They're all going to buy lunch at the city, and Jesus is there with the Samaritan woman. And then here we have Jesus saying something to Judas, and then Judas goes off, and they're like, "Oh, maybe Jesus told him to go buy something or to give it to the poor." Why would they think he's told him to give it to the poor if that's something they had never done or they had never been doing?
I don't know, but it's something that was never mentioned in any stories. So, you know,
Well,
they're trying to come up
there's
with
quite,
they're
I'm
trying to
sure there's
come up
more.
with some kind of explanation for Judas leaving suddenly, for Jesus saying, go do what you have to do quickly. And they don't know. They don't know. They're having
Right.
to
So they come
they're,
up with two options. Either he went to buy something or he went to give money to the poor, because like this is the second time it's come up in this gospel.
uh, well, the first time is not a time. So I just completely reject that as an idea. Um, but uh even trying to give this all of the weight that you're putting on it, this is not an example of Jesus feeding the hungry.
Like, so what would that
This is
look like?
simply not.
Like
Well,
what would
it
an
would
example be like?
in the same way that we see examples of Jesus healing the blind. Uh, we would see Jesus feeding the hungry. He doesn't do it.
What is that like? What example? Like, what are you talking? Like, just going, because this text says that that's something they used to do. They used to give things to the
It
poor.
doesn't say that at all. That it doesn't say that at all. The best you can say is there's a mild implication that maybe that happened, but you're talking about the disciples who are in a state of confusion already, and Jesus is basically saying someone's going to betray me, and I know who it's going to be, and it's going to be Judas, and it's like you know they have no idea. They have no idea what's going on. And so they are quite confused, and they're not. I don't think that this is somehow an allusion to the idea that they gave money to poor people. In fact, the one time
It's
when we see money given to poor people where Jesus is anywhere nearby is the widow's mite. It's the Pharisees giving and the widow giving, and Jesus and his disciples, we don't see them giving at all. We see Jesus judging what other people are giving, but there's no narration in any account of him actually giving any money. So I
well,
just don't. I think that yeah, really
it's just,
that
no, like, no, seriously, like, even just based on what you just said, and even looking at the bigger narrative and the Sermon on the Mount, and following that up with uh the letter in James that says, if someone comes in your midst and you say, "Go home, be well," but you don't meet their needs, then it's like you're acting like someone who doesn't have faith. Like these are like early Christian teachings, and it's pretty clear that there was a lot of
I didn't say
emphasis.
that these weren't early
Well,
Christian teachings. I
well,
said that
I'm
you
I'm
don't
saying
see
you're
you
saying
don't
you're
have
saying
any
Jesus.
examples of yeah, you don't have any
Well,
examples of Jesus doing that.
like, you don't want to accept the stuff that's there, so it's like you don't like this. So what I mean, like, man,
Okay,
it's like
I've given you the
you
chance to
you
make your
won't
case and show
know.
what's
No,
there, and it's not
you've
there.
thrown it out of the blue, right? I've given you an example here. Like they say, oh, maybe he's gone to do something that he already does, to buy something, or
he's gone to give money to the poor. They could have said, or he's gone to give to the temple, or he's gone to do, they could have been a million other things they could have put in there, but there were only two options. You're saying, well, that doesn't prove it, because the only proof that you'll accept is like there's a passage that says Jesus went out and started handing out pieces of food to everyone physically. That's what you'll accept. That's the only stuff you'll accept. You won't accept texts that imply stuff
There,
like this, or
there,
you won't even accept
right?
that
Because there's
the
there's no
apostles
narrated text of
and Jesus
Jesus and his disciples
doesn't
giving
need to
money to
be
the
there.
poor.
Does
It
not
do,
need
it
to
doesn't
be there.
exist.
It doesn't need to be there because it's
Okay.
implied in texts like this that they used to do this already.
All
Jesus
right.
never
Well,
used to like neglect
that
people who were being neglected.
hey
Like
Mac,
we
hey
see that
Mac,
with the
hey Mac, that's fine.
no,
I,
no, it's not fine because you don't want to see it,
no,
but it's
Mac,
okay.
I have heard your argument in its full. I disagree with it. I think that all of the listeners have had a chance to hear your arc. I stopped the show to give you a chance to make your argument. Okay.
About what?
I
No,
used,
you stopped the show to say, "Oh, you see, like Jesus never did any of these things." Like,
but then
okay, well, if that's what you want to
I
believe, then
turned to
fine.
you and asked you if to show where I'm
Out
wrong,
of the
and then when you
blue,
thought that it was, I gave you the chance to point that out. You have
like,
done that.
fair.
I appreciate your effort. I don't agree with your
So, okay.
interpretation, but I think that everybody listening this long, who am I kidding? No one's listening this long. Everyone who's listening this long has had a chance to hear your argument, and they can decide for themselves whether they think that you are correct in that interpretation. I, for one, do not. I think that that's all the
Because you've
prosecution that
already made
needs.
up your mind. You literally wrote a book about how Jesus' teachings are like bad, like
Did you read it?
all of it. I didn't finish it. Um,
You should finish it. It's short. It's an easy read.
but should I finish a book that I fundamentally disagree with? Maybe I will one of these
I
days.
guess you're
But
saying that you won't listen no matter what. You've
no,
made up
I
your mind.
listen, but like up until some point, like the same way you're like, oh, I don't tolerate John Lennox, even though he's making
I have listened to
legit
hours of
arguments.
John Lennox. Okay.
You can listen to
Hours and
something
hours of John Lennox. I dare say I've listened to way more John Lennox than you have read of
that's
my
fine.
writing. So
But like
don't
I've
you don't want
read
to make that
your right a bit.
comparison.
I've been reading your writing for the past
Yeah, I've
5
been
years or
listening to
so.
John Lennox. I've earned my disdain for John Lennox the honest way. I listened to him and considered him, and listened to him in solo, listened to him in debates, and I know what he has to say. So like I said, I come by it honestly, and we don't have much more of it to go. So I think we each have one more stoppage, but I probably will not use mine. Here's the rest of Linux to anyone who cares.
But God become human. The central evidence for this startling claim is, of course, his historical resurrection from the dead that launched Christianity in the world. This is, of course, ladies and gentlemen, a crunch issue. If Jesus rose from the dead, death is not the end and atheism is false. If Jesus did rise...
Okay, I'll spin my last stoppage there. Wrong. If Jesus rose from the dead, then atheism is false. I don't buy that at all. It would mean that death is not the end. It would certainly mean that. It doesn't mean that some God raised him from the dead. It could be that some alien raised someone from the dead. So you'd have to prove that. That's a case to be proven. But to say that if someone rises from the dead, then that's evidence of a God, that's just that's the kind of logical fallacy that John Lennox is, as far as I'm concerned, famous for. So he's so concerned with sophistry that he doesn't bother to check and see if he's actually making a good argument. And by the way, I think that Dan Barker is a little bit of that too, which is why I mostly prefer not to spend my time overly much with either one of them. And it is one of the problems with people who do polemic badly. They spend so much time trying to make a pretty argument that they don't check to see if what they're saying is fallacious or not. Just as long as it sounds good and it gets a nice applause line, then it's fine. That's bad. That's bad polemicism. That's bad argumentation. And this is just one example of it here, and why it is very hard for me to listen to John Lennox for any period of time, because any space of 60 seconds where he's talking, you will find a clunker like that.
Yeah, well, I could have said the same thing about Dan Barker when he was making all the remarks about, oh, like,
I wouldn't have disagreed
oh,
with you if you had said it. So,
the design argument is like when you see a river and you're like, oh, who designed the river like that? Like, that's not even the
like I
argument.
said, I would not have disagreed with you had you chosen to make that point. I made the point myself. And so,
Yeah, but these arguments are still being made by atheists in current.
his arguments are still being made by Christians.
Well, the thing is this: if atheism is true, then it doesn't matter. Like, whatever, you live, then you die. That's it. So, in in that case, like he can make as many fallacious arguments. At the end of the day, it comes down to, okay, what am I predisposed to? Like in the sense of him and you, in a way, like you're always throwing more weight on this is a lie. Like, you just question everything and anything, no matter what. Like, everything has to be on the chopping block. Something can't just be true. It has to be like, what if this? What if that? And like when John Lennox says, like, Jesus rise from the dead is proof that God is real and atheism is false. Like, that's just a simple statement. But you start picking it apart, taking it apart. Well, no, it doesn't. Well, technically it would have to mean this and it would mean that. But in the context of the people who lived at that time, that would prove something substantial about what they believed, not only about Jesus, but about everything else that came before it, because Jesus would be confirming the entire narrative, the entire biblical narrative, and bringing it all full circle. That's what it meant for them. Now, for someone living 2,000 years later, if they hear that someone rose from the dead and if they believe in him, their sins will be forgiven. Like, what does that mean, right? Jesus died for your sins. What does that mean? Then that's when you have to get into the nitty gritty and of everything, and knowing how it all comes together and culminates in Jesus. And so when you say, well, he's just throwing out a sentence or it doesn't make sense, then you're missing the full point of his argument. Yeah.
Okay.
Did not rise from the dead. Christianity is false. And I remember at Cambridge as a student listening to the brilliant Sir Norman Anderson, a legal expert, going through forensically the evidence from his legal perspective as a brilliant lawyer. And he said at the end of it, the empty tomb then of Jesus forms a veritable rock on which all rationalistic theories of the resurrection dash themselves in vain. Just finally now, as I read the Bible, I do not only find intellectual satisfaction, but I find a great deal of that. I sense the voice of God speaking to me. You say that's intensely personal. But ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked tonight about belief in God. And I want to strongly emphasize that God is not a theory, he's a person. And if the origination of me qua person is a personal God, then the most exciting thing really is there a possibility of getting to know God? And so I don't simply believe there is a God. I've come to know him and trust him. And I have strong reasons for doing so, because of Christ dying and rising again for me. And that has generated in me a sense of utterly unmerited forgiveness, acceptance, and peace that has enabled me to face the ugly side of my own nature and with God's help to do something about it. But it's enabled me to face something else. The hardest problem I face as a Christian is the problem of evil and pain. My niece getting a tumor at 22 that kills her? What do I say to my sister? And this is the hardest problem we face. But it seems to me that atheism here has no answer, because by definition, atheism believes that human death is the end, so there is no ultimate hope. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, we could stay here till midnight and beyond arguing, as has been done in this university for centuries, what a good God should, might, would, could, if not, possibly might, just could he not have done, and we'll get nowhere. So it seems to me there's another question we can ask, and it's this. Granted that life presents us with a double picture. We see some beautiful things. We see some ragged edges. We see hurt and pain, and we see joy. How can we come to terms with that? And it seems to me here is no simplistic answer, but a window into an answer, and it's this. If it is actually true that Jesus is, as I believe him to be, the Son of God, then we can ask the question, what is God doing on a cross? And the answer comes back at the very least. God has not remained distant from our human suffering, but has become part of it. And the other side of that is this: because Jesus rose from the dead, he is going to be the ultimate judge. Now here's an irony, because atheism has no ultimate hope of justice by definition. The vast majority of people in the history of the world have died without justice and will die without justice. And if death is the end, then of course they have no hope of ultimate justice. But the promise in the New Testament, guaranteed by the resurrection of Jesus, is that he is to be the judge in the coming day. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are some of the reasons why I believe that God is real and worthy to be trusted. Thank you.
All right, that's enough.
Good speech. Good speech.
Your opinion, your opinion. So, I think that both people cashed a paycheck and thought nothing more about this speech. If they were wise, they thought nothing more about it. So yeah, there's that. I find, in fact, I will close out this time. I usually give you your last word. I think I'll take the last word myself. So, how do you want to wrap this up? Make your final appeal, and then I will make mine, and then we're out the door.
Well, I'd say that for whoever's still listening, that the way that someone's like, they look at life and they're saying, okay, and they ask themselves the question, is this all there really is? You wake up, you do the same thing, you go back to sleep. Is life just routine until the day that you get carried away in a box? That gnawing question of, like, is there more? Like, where does that come from? Like, how does Stardust, yeah, gain omniscience? Well, not omniscience, but consciousness, and then ask itself, where did I come from? Like, even asking the question itself implies there's something greater. So this whole debate about the existence of God and all that, it has to start with the individual. It can't start with someone saying, I'm going to look out in the universe and I'm going to try and figure things out. Because ultimately, if you're right and honest with yourself, like, you're not going to know everything there is to know about the universe. So it's not like you can study the universe and be like, I know enough now to make a conclusion that this is how things work. Like, that's just epistemic humility. So it starts with introspecting and asking yourself, okay, if I found out that God is real, how is that going to impact my life? And since specifically when these debates come up, we're not talking about just a random deity like Thor, like some people bring up, or Zeus, or we're talking about the Christian God. We're talking about Jesus. We're talking about Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And what Lennox brought up there at the end about how you have a God who's not only transcendent, but also became immanent and entered into our suffering, then that's a God who you can relate to on a personal level. And if that's the God you seek to know, then that's what Christianity offers, a God who knows you and who wants to be known. He's not far off. And so that's the message of the Christian. It's believe in this God who wants to know you and also recognize things about yourself that are already true. One, you're not perfect. Second, you're not all knowing. There are things about what your knowledge that are not fully filled out. So you depend. You're a contingent being. You're not independent. You can't say I'm going to use my reason to deny or reject a being who is self-existent and who is also personal and who has entered into my suffering, into my realm, and has made and wants to be known. So if you're saying, well, I know all that, but like I wish I knew God existed, then start by looking at yourself and introspecting and saying, like, would this really change anything about my life? And if you find the answer is no, then ask more questions. Ask why that is. Don't be content with saying, I'm just going to fold my arms and be okay with, just passing along the days and until I get evidence, or taking the side of the demons and being like, maybe they had a good reason. I think these kinds of ideas and mindsets, they don't help you get closer to your goal. If your goal is to know who God is, those ideas push you farther from the goal. It's like if you're training for a marathon and you just eat McDonald's, what you're doing is pushing you farther from the goal. You should be taking steps towards the thing that will get you closer to your goal. If indeed your goal is to know God and to be known by him. So that's all I have to say about this issue. There's a lot more that can be said. But for now, it's like you have to ask yourself, is this going to change my life? Or is it just another thing I can put up on the shelf? Because if it's something else you can add on to your wealth of knowledge, then it's another idol you've added onto your mind. It's not become something that's changed how you see life, how you see reality, how you treat everyone. It's not. It's just become about you. So that's why it's important to know God, because knowing God is worshiping God, knowing him and being known by him. You have no other option. That's how you know it's legitimate. That you know him and you'll worship him. That's the legitimate. It's like, what comes first, the light or the heat? Like they're simultaneous. Knowing God, worshiping God, same thing. And that's what it means to be a Christian, to subject yourself fully to the grace and mercy of God and living in that forever, and not just questioning everything and being like, like, what if they had a good reason? There's never going to be a good reason to rebel against your creator. There's a bad reason. Adam and Eve, they had no good reason to rebel. They were in paradise. And so that's my earnest appeal to anyone who's listening to this. Yeah.
Okay. Knowing God and worshiping God, same thing. We'll just leave that there for the comments. I will pick up my comments kind of where Max left off. My comments usually have absolutely nothing to do with what anyone else says in the closing comments. And so this doesn't really either. It just kind of dovetails. It is this, though. Don't be afraid to be a good skeptic. Even if you're a Christian, you should be a good skeptic, because skepticism is not opposite of Christianity. In fact, I don't think you can be a good Christian if you're not a good skeptic. If you are afraid to hold up the magnifying glass, the spotlight, to your faith, to put it under the microscope and examine it, to ask the hard questions, even though the answer is maybe something that you don't want and are not prepared to deal with. If you're not willing to do that, if you're too afraid to do that, then you don't have a faith worth holding. It's not a good faith. You should be a good skeptic if you're going to be a good Christian. And that means that you've got to ask the forbidden questions. And one of the problems with Christianity, generally speaking, is that there are things that are forbidden questions. You can't ask that question. You can't have that consideration. Okay. You can have some doubts, but you can't doubt that. You can't ask that. And that is just opposed to good skeptics. We were talking about Satan earlier. I think that if you read the Bible story, there are some questions, good questions, that are reasonable to ask, such as we are going to be, if we run the race, if we are a part of the chosen, the elect, you go to heaven and live with God forever. But what about the people who were in heaven with God for possibly millennia? Who knows? They knew him well. Why would they leave? What caused them to leave? And could the same thing cause us to want to leave? Was it a prison? Was it a paradise of God's creation that, he thought everyone should like, but turns out everyone doesn't? Because what's that going to look like when you're there for 1,000,000 years and you want to do something different that you can't do? Maybe you're setting yourself up to be the next Satan. Look, I don't know that there are any answers to these questions, but it's fair to ask the question. And if you can't ask the question, even to yourself, you're not Christianing right, let alone skepticing. Okay. Why was Jesus on the cross? What did that actually accomplish? I mean, it's a question. What John Lennox wants us to think is that, we suffer and we don't have any answers to that, but it should make us feel good that Jesus was there too. It does not make me feel better. My grandmother dying of cancer at a young age, this didn't happen, by the way, she died of something else. But my grandmother dying does not feel any better to know that Jesus suffered, because Jesus didn't have to suffer. And Jesus had a bad couple days. We might say a day and a half if you just count the hours. But he had a rough go of that. And people suffer a lot worse for a lot longer on earth. So what does his suffering accomplish? I think that's a fair question. Well, for God to forgive us, to pay the sin price. Why is the sin price that someone die? Why is blood the price? It's a fair question. It's worth asking. Why are the people who wrote on behalf of God, his biographers in the Old Testament, they make him out to seem like a monster, genocide and laws that seem so much worse than Shira, what I'm talking about, the Muslim law, the bad stuff, so much worse than that. Why? Can we ask that? Why was it okay for those people over there to be enslaved, but it's not okay for us today? It's a good question. And so we could have lots of questions like this. And I don't think that we should just be told to assume everything in the story about God, all the good stuff about God is true and all the bad stuff about God is stuff you don't understand. That seems unreasonable, because maybe we don't understand the good stuff either. Or maybe we understand the bad stuff perfectly. It's all coming from the same story, but it's a matter of where your assumptions are. And if you're being told that the only right way to approach God is to accept on a matter of faith all the good stuff and to reject as stuff that's not worth knowing all the bad stuff, you're not skepticing right. And I think that we have a right to ask these questions. And if Christians can't or won't answer these questions when we talk to them, then it seems fair to say that if we ever get a chance to talk to God, that could maybe go to the source and ask some of these questions there. But to say that we drop our skepticism when we meet this person and we just fall down on our face and worship because he's there and he could kill us, that doesn't seem like a faith worth having. And so I would say that even if you're a Christian, and you've listened to this show today, you've heard me questioning some things that probably you make you feel uncomfortable to question. You should question them. Come up with your best answers. Come up with a good rationalization to why you don't care about the answers, but you can't just ignore it. And if you're a skeptic, follow good skepticism. Question everything. It's okay to question everything because most stuff has good explanations, good answers. Question it. It's good. And the stuff that doesn't have good answers, but you maybe have some opinions about, hold them loosely and keep your eye out for better opinions. So I think at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to that for me. And that's the best that I can draw from this conversation between, well, two fossils that hopefully won't be remembered all that well by the people who come after. And I suspect that one day somebody might say that about Mac and I as well. So with that in mind, thank you for your impassioned commentary and participation, Mac. And next week, I was listening. I had a show that I was going to do if we didn't get together this week. It's a debate between Bart Ehrman and a dude in a cowboy hat and a long red beard, Jimmy somebody.
Oh, the Catholic guy, Jimmy Akin.
Yeah, Jimmy Akin. And I thought that discussion was far better than the one that we looked at today. But the thing is, that discussion is very long. We'd probably need to break it up into 3 shows to do it. So I almost never know what we're going to do from one week to the next, but that is my bid for that one. And I will send you a link to that if you want to take a look at that particular one. I find that Bart Ehrman, even when I disagree with him, which is more than you might think, he's still one of the great speakers of our time. He's a very animated debater. And Jimmy, I think he's paired well there. And so that's a very interesting discussion between a couple of people who are not fossils and whose opinions probably should be taken a bit more seriously.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
All right. So with that, we will see you in the comments. For those who do not look at the shorts, I have declared political silly season open. So Trump, he's received a historic conviction, which most likely doesn't matter. That's not the one that anybody cares about, and it's there. I mean, it's historic. It's significant for history. It's not significant for criminality, in my opinion. So we'll see. But look, all of this is happening. It's coming down. We will see a lot more of this year, and it is ridiculous to say, well, you can't talk about these events on the board. So there's always a time during the election seasons when I just have to acknowledge, okay, it's silly season. This is where we're going to go for a little while. So fire up your best political commentary. Do not send me an email about your political commentary. I don't give a damn, and I will not respond. So, but you can send me an email about anything else. So on the board, skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com, log in your Discuss account, discuss away, send me an email about anything other than politics, skepticsandseekers@gmail.com. Until next time, see you in the comments. In the meantime, I always like to time this with ending the recording, and I never can. In the meantime, screw it. I'm out.